Hey guys! Tonight we step softly into a city that pretends to sleep. You arrive at ancient Uruk by lamplight, where warm clay holds the day's heat and the river's breeze makes torches flicker like patient fireflies. A sheep bleats behind a wall like a tired door hinge, and you realize gently that you probably won't survive temple paperwork without a nap and a snack. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, drop a quick comment with your location and local time. I love seeing our sleepy map of the world fill up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You place your hand on a cool mud brick and step inside, letting your eyes adjust as the quiet rearranges itself into shelves, jars, and the calm grammar of storage. You slip through a low doorway into the temple storeroom and let the dark organize itself. Reed mats soften your steps. Lamps sketch small halos over baskets. Barley sits shoulder to shoulder like patient oxen. Jars line the room, their mouths pinched shut with clay and impressed while still wet little ovals and tidy lines that turn memory into touch. You move with hush. A reed stylus rests on a tray, its tip splayed from long service. You feel faint, grit river silt and chopped straw, a mix that retains every fingertip. Here's a quirky secret. The clay keeps touch. Tablets and stoppers preserve fingerprints, smudges, even the hesitation of a wrist. Someone stood here millennia ago, sealed a jar with one careful twist, and left a print that still whispers, "I am responsible." Outside, the Iana precinct murmurs. Priests and stewards drift through courtyards. Canals bring reed boats heavy with grain and wool. A mainstream fact settles. By the late 4th millennium BCE, the earliest known writing appears here proto-cuneiform, born from administration, from ration lists of barley and beer, from tallies of animals and workers. Not epics yet, just the quiet poetry of getting dinner counted and delivered. You walk the shelves like paragraphs. Heavy goods live low, fragile goods rest high. Seals face outward so meaning is public. A clay stopper acts as a polite name tag. Rolled with a cylinder seal or pressed with a carved stamp, it carries identity in miniature. You imagine the owner's small pride and decide not to tell the jar it's overdressed. The room invents its own weather. Moths orbit the lamps. A draft brings the smell of wet reeds. Water drips somewhere, steady as a sleepy drummer. You admire the logic beneath the shelves. A place for everything and a promise to remember it. Write it down, roll it, seal it, leave it ancient office life with better pottery. You pause at a shallow basket of smooth, baked pebbles. They are cousins of what you'll meet later, small clay shapes standing in for real things. A cone might mark a measure of grain. A sphere might stand for oil. An ovoid might gently suggest livestock. You let the idea settle. Before marks on tablets, people here used objects as thoughts. Historians still argue whether those tokens led directly to writing or whether both practices grew together from the same administrative soil. A steward passes, nodding so economically it could be audited. He sets fresh stoppers to firm in the draft, checks a shelf mark, and leaves. He does not ask who you are because you already behave like someone who belongs to inventory. Slow, careful, mildly dusty. You lift a cylinder seal from a peg, roll it across your palm without touching clay, and return it to its hook as if it were a sleeping cat. The design is meticulous tiny figures in procession, a formal hunt, a claim that says, "The person who rolled me owns this story." Soft joke number 1. Misplace this, and you're explaining to security goats why you can't get into the storeroom. They're strict, those goats. Across the room, a raw heap of clay hides under damp cloths. When you lift a corner, the scent is mineral and new. The clay resembles bread dough that chose a different career. Soft joke number 2. Tonight, you're on a low-carb diet. You only eat spreadsheets. Your palm trails along a row of jars. Each seal is a tiny event, a perfect roll here, a smudge there, a faint scratch from an emergency reed stylus. Improvisation is timeless office life. You kneel to a floor, mark 3 lines, a gap, then a cross, and your shoulders understand. This belongs here, not there. Systems teach posture before they teach grammar. Another mainstream truth lands. Many early tablets record rations paid to workers measured barley and beer allocated by role rather than by name. The ledger is communal before it becomes individual, and fairness feels possible when everyone's share is counted in the open. That hope, like clay, hardens best when shaped with damp patience. You sit on a low stool and let your back uncoil. From the courtyard, a bell chimes once. The city's soundscape becomes an index. Dripping, grinding, bleeding, breathing. You are inside a catalog, where every object insists, gently, remember me. Soft joke number 3. Somewhere, a meeting about jars ran 5 minutes long because someone discovered the revolutionary idea of heavy ones on the bottom. The motion passes unanimously, but the room is more than a stage for jokes and facts. Here thought condenses into touch. You picture tomorrow's tasks. Count sacks, tally baskets, seal jars, make marks. You promise to follow the slow logic, no rushing, no heroic shortcuts. Clay punishes speed. It rewards calm. Near the door, a draft lifts lamp smoke into thin ribbons. You straighten the leaning tablet so it will not kiss the floor. You have done no work, and yet you have done something. Joined the chain of small kindnesses that keeps a city from wobbling. You listen to the lamb, the drip, the moths, the low breath of Uruk, and you understand why the first writing did not arrive with trumpets. It arrived as whispers that hardened overnight. You press your hand to your chest and feel your own breath counting itself 10, perhaps 60, whatever base the heart prefers at this hour. The room approves. You are ready to follow the story of clay as far as it wants to go, beginning here, with shelves, with seals, with a napping stylus and inventory dreams, ledger dreams, and you, drifting comfortably between them, thinking in objects, practicing trust. You step out from the storeroom into air that tastes like damp brick and river reed, and the night thins toward a pearly gray. A gatekeeper yawns, a hinge sighs, and you follow the soft bell notes of a flock herded along the canal path. The sheep move like a slow cloud with legs, each back a little hill, each breath a puff of the same quiet weather. Lanolin perfumes the morning. Your sandals meet silt and accept a promotion to mud managers. Past the wall, fields open barley heads dark against dew, irrigation channels gliding between them like sleepy mirrors. Somewhere a flute tests a phrase. Somewhere a dog applies for the position of assistant shepherd by wagging so hard it practically signs its own contract. The shepherd waves, the staff a punctuation mark against the horizon. He is a manager of wool on 4 legs, and you become, for a moment, his trainee. The lead ram wears a colored cord. Today he is the intern who thinks he's the boss. Shouldering forward with the self-esteem of a small boat. Lamps from the city fade behind you as the countryside picks up the sentence. You learn the shepherd's lexicon. Ewes like muffled drums. Rams with a polite thunder. Lambs doing the academic sport of hop and pause. A mainstream truth unrolls as evenly as the path. In southern Mesopotamia, temple households maintain large institutional flocks, and the city's workshops, especially the weavers, depend on this annual tide of wool. You crouch to watch a lamb nose a reed shoot. The shepherd taps a clay tag hanging from a leather thong and murmurs numbers that feel like lullabies. Some sheep carry small knotted cords or inked marks. Later, at the pens, those marks become entries. The system is not loud about its cleverness. It trusts repetition, season after season, and the strangely calming idea that memory can be distributed among many small things, tags, ties, tallies, and the shared habit of noticing. When lambing season finishes, the flock will come home with totals that must reconcile with what the temple expects. Historians still argue whether this temple economy dominates everyday exchange or runs alongside lively private trade, but out here, the debate looks like dew on wool. Present, delicate, and not in a hurry to evaporate. A gentle fringe tidbit drifts in with the breeze. These sheep carry treasure in their tails. Fat-tailed breeds are prized here, the tail stores rich reserves that cooks love, lampmakers eye, and hands appreciate when wind chaps the skin. You touch a smear of tail fat the shepherd keeps in a small jar. It smells clean and a little sweet, a practical kindness against reed-cut fingers. The dog approves your research methods and licks your notes. The flock pauses at a shallow ford. The water folds around their legs. The bells, small beaten cups of metal, make a soft confetti of sound. Whether these bells are temple issue or the shepherd's private style is something the storeroom probably has an opinion about, but the lambs vote to splash anyway. You watch the shepherd count in groups, not sheep by sheep, because the day is long and the mind prefers patterns to pebbles. Your own breath decides to practice base 60 the way it practiced base U in the storeroom, and you smile at the continuity of counting. Everything prefers a rhythm. As sun lifts, you turn with the flock toward holding pens near the city. Pens are not merely fences, they are paragraphs where wool becomes a sentence. Assistants receive the animals like librarians receiving books at day's end. A notched stick here indicates how many passed. A clay tag there says which pasture they came from. A reed basket waits for tags like a humble inbox. You help with the calm chaos, hand the jar of balm to a worker. Unhook a caught cord. Pretend you knew how to do this yesterday. Joke number 1. Congratulations, you're promoted to junior assistant to the acting deputy of Don't Let That Lamb Eat the Record. Back inside Uruk, the temple household hums with the industrious hush of a beehive that has recently read a manual on organization. Courtyards sort traffic. Animals one way, sacks and baskets another. People with questions toward the office with the least comfortable stools. You slip toward the textile compound, where combing and carding turn fleece clouds into long, docile lines. The spindles purr, the looms click with the patience of well-brought-up crickets. Women at the looms pass drafts of cloth like sheets of river made solid. Another mainstream fact arrives, smooth as a spindle's whir. Across many periods, Mesopotamian temple workshops employ large groups of women to weave standardized textiles, and ration tablets show barley and beer allocated by role, age, and skill. A steward eyebrows engineered for audit invites you to wash your hands at a basin. The water runs from a jar tilted just so. The drain disappears into a saucer of pebbles that make a miniature riverbed. He shows you a board with pegs where tablet categories live. Flocks received. Wool recorded. Rations issued. Repairs authorized. Offerings approved. You recognize the logic from the storeroom shelves. Meaning is placement before it is writing. He taps a peg. Your mouth says, ah, and your stomach says breakfast. And the steward's eyebrows offer a sympathetic deduction. A cook glides by with a pot of barley porridge, and your nose files a complimentary memo. A brewer's apprentice places jars to cool in a shaded corner. The clay stoppers wait nearby like dignified hats. The temple household is a city within a city: kitchens, workshops, stores, offices, shrines, each tied together by shared ledgers, so nothing wanders too far without leaving a footprint. You chuckle as a goat, embodying the spirit of corporate compliance, attempts to read a tablet by nibbling it. Joke number 2. The goat fails the comprehension check but passes the impression section with ruminant honors. In a long room with open walls, scribes sit at low tables. One smooths clay with a wet palm. Another impresses small signs that, for now, remain more pictorial than phonetic. You recognize familiar gestures, a supervisory glance, a useful throat clearing, the sharpen and sigh cycle performed by tools and people alike. When a shepherd's assistant presents a handful of tags, the scribe moistens a tablet and begins. Numbers become marks. Marks become an entry. The entry finds its home on the pegboard. You watch the city become legible, one quiet wedge at a time. Outside the office, fleece bales are tied with cords and sealed with small clay lumps. The shepherd rolls his cylinder seal across the lump, a moving poem of tiny figures and animals. Identity, responsibility, a little flourish of style, it's all there, no shouting required. You wonder how often someone tries a sneaky swap, a better bale for a worse one, a shrug where a signature should be. The steward's eyebrows darken at the thought. Gentle reminder, The system runs on trust seasoned with verification, like soup with a wise pinch of salt. The mid-morning breeze carries temple music, soft strings, the whisper of a drumhead, a singer tracing a melody that seems to know the shape of the courtyard. A boy runs past with a basket of combed wool and a grin that has not yet learned the weight of pegs and ledgers. You linger in the doorway and rest your shoulder against cool plaster. Joke number 3 floats up like a lazy bubble. The city is a giant to-do list, and your item 17, admire wool, don't trip. In a shaded corner, an older scribe tells you a plain truth dressed in comfort. Most days are not epics. Most days are counting days, moving what the land gives to where the hands need it, so that when an epic tries to begin, the city is fed enough to listen. You think back to the storeroom's fingerprints, to the sleeping stylus, to the tiny parade rolling across clay. The same patience applies here in the daylight: sheep, cords, tags, bowls of porridge, as if the city breathes in wool and breathes out cloth. At noon, the sun declares a recess, and the courtyard dials down to a slower hum. You help stack reed baskets, return a jar lid to its rightful place, and straighten a loitering tablet so it doesn't kiss the floor. Order feels less like control and more like friendship with the inevitable. A final detail to pocket for later. The day's wool tallies will ripple outward into many rooms, rations for weavers, allotments for offerings, perhaps barter with a merchant whose boat smells like distant orchards. The administrative water wheel turns without splash. When the steward finally nods dismissal, you step back into the alley with the restful sense that 1,000 small agreements have been kept. The sheep are pens of shadows now, the bells silent, the dog asleep in a spilled sunbeam. You wipe a dot of tail balm from your knuckle and smile. The city hums because flocks walk, because kitchens steam, because tablets remember. You let this quiet bureaucracy settle into your shoulders like a shawl and walk on, ready to see how objects become ideas when clay decides to impersonate the world. You enter a small side room where the floor keeps secrets and the shelves keep score, and the steward hands you a shallow bowl filled with shapes that look like snacks from a very dull party cones. Spheres, discs, ovoids, little lentils, the occasional tetrahedron flexing its edges like it worked out. You run your fingers through them and feel grit and coolness, the same mineral breath as the tablets, but lighter thoughts you can spill and gather. These are clay tokens, portable stand-ins for real things. Tonight they ride in your belt pouch like pocket vocabulary, each shape whispering, "I represent something you plan to remember." The steward tips a few onto a reed mat and nods. Simple tokens first. Cones, spheres, discs. You line them up into neat families, the way the shepherd earlier grouped sheep by habit. A mainstream fact settles comfortably. Long before writing, across the Fertile Crescent by the 8th to 4th millennia BCE, people used small clay tokens to track quantities of goods such as grain, oil, textiles, or animals. You test their logic. A single cone might stand for a unit of grain. 5 cones become an afternoon of storage decisions. A small pile becomes an argument you can hold. You don't declare which shape equals which commodity because, as the steward murmurs, local systems vary, and historians still argue whether each token had a strict one-to-one meaning or played a more flexible category game. You practice arithmetic the quiet way, not by saying numbers, but by rearranging weight and touch. 2 cones slide next to 3, the seam between them smoothing into 5 with the satisfaction of bread dough. You tie them into a thong by tens because your fingers enjoy shortcuts, then untie them again to try a base 6-0 bundle because Uruk loves a challenge. Joke number 1. You invent the pocket abacus, immediately misplace it in your other pocket, then realize you're not wearing modern pockets. You settle for a tidy net bag that rustles like dry rain. In the corner, an apprentice pinches fresh clay into shapes, a production line of ideas. He uses a simple mold for spheres, a rolling pinch for lentils, a firm press for discs. You try one and discover the craft's soothing rhythm. Press, turn, smooth, bake, cool. The tokens sit on a tray like a very polite flock of punctuation marks. The older scribe shows you complex tokens, incised with lines or textured with dots, possible upgrades representing more specific goods or processed items. The set feels like a language without verbs yet, only nouns, and your hands become grammar. A quirky tidbit slips in like a shy goat. Some tokens come pierced, and people seem to have strung them like bracelets or kept them tied in labeled clusters. You imagine an accountant's forearm, jingling with inventory, a friendly wind chime of barley, oil, and, "Please, don't bump into the doorframe." Another fringe whisper. Archaeologists sometimes find token caches in houses as well as temples, hinting that households ran their own mini ledgers beside the big public books. Your pouch approves this democratization and jostles encouragingly at your hip. You ask what happens when someone needs to show proof of a transaction. The steward smiles but saves the demonstration for later. For now, he lets you role-play. You are the barley office. A weaver arrives needing rations for her team. She places a small string of cones on your mat, already counted, already argued with privately, and you examine them the way you'd scan an email subject line for tone. Are they the right shapes? Are they baked, not crumbly? Do they match what her last delivery promised? You hand back a corresponding set from your bowl to confirm receipt. Clay touches clay. Meaning touches meaning. Joke number 2. Congratulations, you just invented reply all with fewer regrets. The room's light leans toward afternoon, and the scribe gestures at a shelf where token bags hang from pegs. Each bag is tagged with a lump of clay pressed while wet. A seal roll, a quick sign, an owner's little myth parading across a tiny stage. You memorize this choreography object, bag, seal, so your mind will know where to reach later. A mainstream fact tucks itself beside the pegs. Cylinder seals act as signatures and authorization, rolled across soft clay to leave a unique ribbon. They turn private counting into public accountability. Your hands return to the bowl and learn the difference between thinking and tallying. Thinking is clean. Tallying gets clay under your nails. A shepherd steps in with a pouch that clacks like a pocketful of calm thunder. Together you count lambs added since yesterday. He slides one small ovoid across the mat, then another for a ewe, then a disc for their combined ration, a practice as intuitive as tapping your pockets before you leave a room. Scholars still debate whether these tokens traveled mostly as pre-transaction requests, as portable receipts after distribution, or as both. The steward shrugs in a wise way. That means the practice worked across many contexts, so the categories probably overlap like reeds in a mat. You test the system's sleepiness. If you close your eyes, can you tell 5 cones from 5 spheres? The cones prick your palm. The spheres nestle. Touch becomes metadata. You attempt blind addition, feel impressive for 2 seconds, then cheat by peeking because honesty is valuable, but so is finishing before dinner. Joke number 3. Your palm invents haptics, sends a bill to the future, and is paid in barley. A tray of retired tokens sits by the doorway. Shapes softened by years of handling. They look like memories rounded by telling. You roll one between finger and thumb and think of the goat that tried to eat a tablet. Tokens seem more edible snack, sized and persuasive, but also more stubborn. This is why the city bakes them. A little fire converts fragile promises into durable ones. Another mainstream detail strolls in. Many tokens were intentionally fired, not just sun-dried, increasing longevity so they could circulate through countless small exchanges without melting back into mud at the first sigh of rain. You glance at the apprentice's notes, really just a wet tablet, with marks denoting batches. He doesn't write sentences. He maps piles. The room explains itself without speeches. Tokens externalize memory. They break a large obligation into a handful of touchable bits so that anyone sleepy, busy, excited, distracted can recombine them into meaning on demand. If you can borrow a whole system's patience, you don't have to trust your brain alone. It's the ancient equivalent of leaving too many tabs open. Except here the tabs don't crash and the worst pop-up is a moth. The steward finally allows one small spoiler for your future. Sometimes, to fix information at a specific moment, say, when goods move between hands, people enclose tokens in a clay envelope and seal it. But he waves that aside. A promise for later. and returns you to the bowl. For now, it's enough that your fingers can discover arithmetic without digits written anywhere, that a string of shapes becomes a sentence you can't accidentally shout. Evening hovers. The air tastes like water and dust, and a little wool. You gather the tokens back into their bowl and draw a wet palm across the mat to collect crumbs, returning them to the lump of clay that will be tomorrow's shapes. The scribe marks that today's batch is complete. The apprentice covers the fresh tokens with a cloth. The steward restores the bowl to its shelf. The room exhales as if a long paragraph has ended with a period you can touch. As you step back into the corridor, your pouch now light, you feel a small upgrade in your inner furniture. Where there was fog, there are trays. Where there was guesswork, there are shapes. The city's mind is distributed in 1,000 small objects, and tonight you carried a piece of it. Tomorrow, you'll see what happens when tokens want witnesses, when clay needs to prove itself to another piece of clay. But for now, you walk with the calm of someone who can literally count on their hands without raising a single finger. You follow the steward to a courtyard where order smells faintly of damp rope and toasted clay. On a low bench rest standard jars with careful rims, each one a quiet promise to be the same size tomorrow as today. A reed pole marked with tiny knife nicks leans against the wall. Beside it, a tablet lists conversions with the confidence of a recipe. This much barley becomes that much flour, becomes that many calm dinners. You dip your fingers into a squat measuring jar and feel the chill of stored river. The steward taps its shoulder. "Sila?" He murmurs roughly a liter to your modern hunch, though he will not say liter because the jar already knows what it is. The rim carries a shallow scratch to level the top. Even the scratch has seniority. A boy waddles up, hugging a bigger jar, and sets it down with the soft thud of a sleepy drum. 10 stylus make a ban. 6 bands, 60 silas compose a barig. 5 barigs, 300 silas rise to a gur, a gentle hill of volume the city can stand on. You say the names the way you might chant weather. Sila, ban, barig, gur. The rhythm sticks, and suddenly your brain has a handle on liquid grain. A mainstream fact lands politely. Across Mesopotamia, capacity measures organize themselves into sexagesimal clusters, and scribes work comfortably in base 6-0 long before most of the world thinks to borrow that trick for circles and minutes. The steward hands you a scoop like a little crescent moon, its lip burnished by 1,000 barley tides. You pour stilus into a ban jar, and the sound is almost a lullaby grain hissing like faraway rain, the rim tapping like a tiny bell when you level it with a damp palm. Accuracy here is a social agreement you can feel. The seal impression on the jar's shoulder looks like a parade of tiny beings. But what it truly certifies is shape. This jar is what it claims to be, and no one is allowed to have an opinion about that. Sheep drift back into your thoughts, because measures love company. A sheep and goat's account does not just tally bodies, it maps appetites. Ration lists tie loaves and beer to labor and season, and the arithmetic sneaks through the day like a friendly cat. One worker's ration might be about 1 to 2 silas of barley a day, depending on task and period. Beer is reckoned by capacity vessels as well, safe, nourishing, and a polite way to make river water regret its germs. The steward sets one ban on its side, taps it twice, and says, "We owe the textile team half of this by sunset." Joke 1 floats up like steam. You vow not to drink the evidence, and the brewer across the yard pretends not to hear you promising the impossible. Under the eave hangs a cord of standard weights, duck-shaped teardrop, little barrel, because volume is only half the city's music. Though you are playing with jars, weight hums the same bass 6-0 chorus. 60 shekels become a mina. 60 minas make a talent. The words feel heavy even before you lift anything. You rest your palm on a weight. It is cool and absolutely certain of itself. The opposite of gossip. Somewhere, a scribe copies a table of equivalents and lets out a contented yawn the size of a small amphora. A quirky tidbit grins from the workbench. Some capacity jars wear built-in strainers or spouted lids because beer wants to arrive without husks. Nobody likes chewing their arithmetic. In the corner, a brewer's apprentice tests a gackle-style strainer holes arranged like a precise little constellation over a ban jar. The burble through perforations could tuck a city in. The apprentice insists the pattern filters better if the holes form a tiny goat. You refrain from rolling your eyes because we are a pro-goat workplace now. The steward scratches a quick diagram on a damp tablet, circles and strokes that summarize the day's conversions. Imagine, he says, 4 gur of barley arrive at dusk. You break it aloud into barigs, 20 of them, each 60 silas, then into bands, then back down into silas, like climbing a ladder for the joy of the steps. Historians still argue whether base 6-0 springs from finger segment counting, from a marriage of base 1-0 and base 1-2 traditions, or from early astronomical habits that like the way the sky splits. The courtyard does not care so long as supper happens on time. You try finger math anyway, counting the 3 finger bone segments on the 4 fingers of one hand 12 and advancing the thumb as a pointer. 5 12s hum to 60. Your hands become a small abacus that never loses its beads. Joke 2. You award yourself a certificate in Advanced Digital Computing, and the Reed stylus rolls its eyes because that pun is older than the city wall. A woman from the textile court steps in with a question that looks like cloth. If her team weaves a standard length of fabric, how many workers' rations can a gur of grain cover? You write the problem in silence so she can hear the answer form. 1 gur is 300 silas. If one worker earns, say, 1.5 silas a day in rations, then a single gur funds 200 worker days of patient weaving plus the crumbs the mice apply for, which the steward declines with admirable professionalism. She nods, ties her hair with a reed strip, and glides away, trailing the gentle mathematics of dinner behind her. Another mainstream detail pads in, self-assured. Later, old Babylonian scribes formalize place value for base 6-0, writing numbers with wedge clusters in positions a breathtaking convenience future mathematicians will admire while pretending they aren't jealous. Yet, even before that elegance spreads, practical calculation thrives with tables on clay, standard vessels on benches, and conversions carved into memory. The city's body remembers what the city's books record. On a narrow shelf stand calibration jars used to check today's tools against yesterday's promises. If the band swells in the sun or the sila warps at the rim, the calibration jar tattles in liquid language. The steward shows you how to test. Fill to the etched line, level it, and listen to the quiet that follows. Integrity, here, is audible. Another quirky whisper. Some officials own their seals but not their standards. The standards live in temples, as though the gods themselves babysit measurements so mortals cannot accidentally grow an extra ration with a creative jug. The afternoon warms, and you sit in shade with a pile of problem tablets from the Adaba. School tone, light, sarcasm. If a canal segment of such and such width and depth must deliver so many silas per day, how many banjars arrive per watch? You work it out with sleepy dignity, converting volume to time as if the numbers themselves are water. The exercise ends with a snack the school insists is a didactic incentive, which is definitely the long way to say snack. The steward returns to sheep because you promised not to forget them. How many silas of barley does a modest flock consume over a lunar month if each adult receives a fixed ration and lambs count as halves? You write the answer next to a tiny drawing of a lamb you insist is diagrammatic, not bad. The math is kind. It does not shout. It simply walks from silo to trough with the dignity of breakfast. Historians still argue whether ration scales reflected ideal diets or negotiable norms that shifted with politics and harvest. Your stomach votes for ideal and files a polite protest when the debate continues. You catch yourself stroking the rim of a jar the way you'd pet a cat, and the jar purrs in the language of ceramics utterly silent but very convincing. Joke 3. You promise to return the affection by not dropping it. The jar promises to remain exactly 1 sila even if you compliment it excessively. Everyone sets realistic goals. A clerk arrives with a ledger of repairs, broken handles, cracked rims, a band that tried to be a drum and failed the audition. You sign off on replacements by rolling a neat seal across a clay tag and writing the smallest possible note that still counts. The clerk beams at your efficiency as if you invented time. You accept the award on behalf of all future people who will also pretend to invent time. And the cylinder seal, which is the true celebrity here, enjoys the applause. The steward smooths the tablet, erasing the day's practice until it gleams like an unused page. He stacks the standard jars in descending order, a tidy skyline of certainty, and hangs the weights again. For ceremony, he taps the mina with a knuckle. The note is dull, familiar, utterly unromantic, and therefore deeply reliable. In the corner, the brewer decants clarified beer into labeled vessels. The aroma is bread singing in liquid form. You taste a sip and memorize the aftertaste as if it were a number. As dusk leans in, you realize the measure system has braided itself into your pace. You walk in units now. A doorway 3 stylus wide, a courtyard 1 barig long, an evening the length of a gur poured steadily into a city's chores. The numbers do not decorate life. They scaffold it. When you return to the storeroom later, tokens will make more sense because the jars have taught your hands to speak their language. And when you sleep, if you do the rhythm that rocks, you will be base 6-0, counted softly across knuckles and jars and sheep bells, a lullaby you can add without closing your eyes. You leave the courtyard with a practiced bow to the standards. In your pouch, you carry nothing. No tokens, no weights, just the new habit of thinking in silas and bands and barigs and gurs, a vocabulary of volume that behaves itself. Somewhere behind you, the goat finally receives a promotion. It will guard the calibration shelf by standing very near it and chewing only the reeds of the mat. You approve the appointment and drift down the corridor, comforted that even the city's math is house-trained. You return to the storeroom and the steward sets a new lesson on the table. A small, hollow ball of clay, smooth, unassuming, and about the size of a gentle fist. He raps it with a knuckle. It answers with a muffled rattle like a pebble in a gourd. Inside, tokens knock softly together. Bulla, he says, as if naming a quiet animal. You cup it in both hands, feeling warmth where a palm left heat moments ago. Clay knows who touched it. Clay remembers, not with ink, but with dents, prints, and the choreography of sealing. He shows you how it's born. First, a shallow cup of damp clay. Then the tokens, cones for grain, lentils for oil, an ovoid for a U dropped in with that small, ceremonial pause before each piece. The same pause you learned when leveling a sila. A second clay disc caps the opening. Thumb and forefinger pinch the seam until it disappears into a continuous skin. You roll the sphere gently on the board to smooth it, and the rattle softens into a single sound, like a lullaby's consonant. The steward nods toward the seal rack. Time to give this envelope a voice. You choose a cylinder seal you've met before, the tiny parade of figures, and roll it across the bulla in 2 neat bands that intersect like a sleepy crosshatch. Identity flows onto clay. This is the shepherd seal, and now the shepherd is a perimeter around meaning. A mainstream fact settles. By the late 4th millennium BCE, such hollow clay bullae appear across Uruk and Susa, contexts as tamper, evident envelopes for tokens. They're sealed skins bearing cylinder seal impressions that function as signatures and authority. The shepherd arrives, smelling faintly of lanolin and sunrise. He requests rations against the flock's expected shearing. The steward weighs the request the way he weighed a mina, quietly, with shoulders that prefer honesty. Together they count tokens onto the board. Together they watch you and close them. Then the steward adds his own seal, another band of tiny drama, and, for good measure, presses the storeroom stamp into the damp seam. Joke 1. Welcome to 2-factor clay authentication, something you confirm with a roll and a soul, crushing respect for procedures. Before the clay stiffens, the steward performs a small ritual you almost miss. With a stylus, he pokes 2 tiny holes straight through the shell, opposite each other. Air whispers out. The bulla sighs like it was holding its breath. Quirky tidbit. Some bullae are pierced so they can be strung on cords, hung from pegs, or tied to the mouth of a bag as a physical lock break the bulla. And you break the proof. He threads a cord and knots it, then smears a thumbnail over the knot and seals that, too. If trust is a fabric, this is the extra stitch at the hem. You ask, softly, how anyone checks what's inside without ruining the promise. He smiles the way his eyebrows smile when they're pleased with a question. They don't, he says, at least not now. That is the point. The bulla travels as a closed argument. If it must be audited, someone with standing steward, scribe, witness breaks it, counts the tokens, and records what they find. Historians still argue whether most bullae served as receipts after a transfer, as promissory packages before a delivery, or as a way to immobilize stock like a pledge you can rattle but not spend. You shake it once, carefully. The tokens knock like tiny hoofbeats. The steward raises one eyebrow by a measured shekel and says, "Do not test trust by percussion." You set it down as if it is asleep. Around you, finished bullae rest in a shallow tray, each bearing a little biography of seals, shepherd, steward, sometimes a third for the office where it will be opened. Some skins carry faint impressions of the token shapes themselves, cones, discs, ovoids pressed against the outside before sealing, a preview of the contents for people who prefer not to break promises without cause. You file that hint under tomorrow's intuition, a bridge toward marks that will one day stand alone. In the courtyard, the air smells of drying straw and cautious optimism. A messenger takes a pair of bullae to the textile compound, strung on a cord like heavy grapes. He salutes with the serious dignity of a person who knows breaking one without permission is a career change. Joke 2. The messenger calls this Inbox 0, because once you deliver the envelopes, nobody writes back. They just smash your email with a mallet in front of witnesses. You sit with a scribe who maintains the bulla register. On each line, date, parties, purpose, count of tokens by type, and when necessary, a notation about where the pair of air holes sits, north, south, or east-west, so that if someone slips a string out and back in again, the angles betray them. The city is not paranoid, it is experienced. Another mainstream detail pads in softly. Cylinder seals are personal, often inherited. Their motifs, banquets, hunts, divine emblems signal identity across time. And their misuse is a social wound, not just a clerical error. A shepherd's apprentice arrives with a worry the size of a lamb. Could someone shave the rim of a bulla while still keeping seal bands intact? Pry, swap a token, then reseal? The steward rotates a completed sphere under the light and points to the seam where thumb and seal overlap. Not without leaving a tremor, he says. He shows you the habit of reading surface like skin. Pale spots where a hand dried too quickly. Hairline cracks where clay was too lean. Fingerprints that form accidental constellations. Your eyes adjust. The bulla's face is no longer blank. It's a map of what the day believed. You help close another. A merchant pledges oil to the temple for an upcoming festival. The tokens go in lentils for oil, and the merchant adds his seal. A ribbon of boats and fish. The steward strings and ties. A priest witnesses. A little reed note, rolled and sealed to itself, names the festival. Scholars still debate whether accompanying tags were common across all districts or a local habit here, but the effect is soothing. Words hum alongside objects, and both are wrapped in ceremony that smells like wet earth and warm hands. The goat reappears as an unsecured consultant, attempting to nibble a drying bulla. The steward shoos it with a noise that files under policy enforcement. Joke 3. The goat claims it's conducting a tamper resistance test. The steward claims the goat has failed ethics training and will receive remedial reads. By midday, the tray holds a little city of spheres. You lift one and weigh it like a fruit. Even without shaking, your palm learns to guess a count from heft. That's base 60 visiting by feel. 60 small cones inside make a weight you can almost hum. You place it back and note how the seal bands make a grid that discourages cutting. Trust is not a feeling here. It's a design principle. A courier from the granary arrives with a cracked bulla found at the gate stress line along the seam, one seal band smudged. The steward records, compromised, breaks it deliberately and pours the tokens onto a tray. The scribe reads the register. 2 barig of barley and tokens, shepherd seal, steward seal. You both count, the total matches. A shrug of relief spreads like shade. The steward remakes the envelope with fresh clay, reseals, and logs the day's scar. The act feels liturgical. We admit a flaw, we remake the trust, we carry on. In a corner, the Aduba's problem tablets evolve. Students practice drawing little circles and strokes to stand for tokens, without enclosing them training wheels for a new habit you can feel approaching. But the steward waves that future back a step. Not yet, he says kindly. Let the envelope finish speaking. You nod, and let the present be enough. A sphere, a rattle, a ribbon of identity, a cord that says no, a witness that says yes. Late afternoon leans warm. You press one last seal across wet clay and realize your hand's rhythm has slowed to match the city's. Enclose, smooth, roll, pierce, string, knot, seal. Each step is small. Together they are civilization at room temperature. You stack the day's bulla in order of opening soonest on top, long dreams below. The steward taps the tray's rim, the same gesture he used on standard jars, and you hear the family resemblance. This, too, is a measure of obligations, of memory, of who promised what to whom and when. As lamps brighten, you imagine the shepherd collecting his sealed proof, tying it to a belt, and walking home past the calibration shelf where the goat pretends to stand guard. You imagine the weavers receiving their pair, hanging it by the door where drafts keep clay honest. And you imagine, not yet fully, but almost, a day when the city will flatten the envelope into a tablet and let marks alone do the traveling. That door stands ajar in your mind. For tonight, you leave it politely closed and carry your sleep toward the tray of small, rattling moons. The steward returns with something that looks suspiciously like a clay pancake cooling on a reed tray. No butter, no honey, just damp promise. He places it in front of you, sets down a little pile of tokens beside it, and says in a voice that has never rushed a day in its life, "Let numbers come outside." You nod like you've been waiting your whole life to press a cone into soft clay. The bulla taught you how an envelope carries its cargo. Now the tablet teaches you how to let the cargo leave a shadow and still keep walking. You start with the familiar shapes. A cone for grain, a lentil for oil, a neat ovoid for that you who thinks she runs the office. You press each token into the tablet's surface, lift straight up, and admire the crisp cavities they leave. It's oddly satisfying, like stamping cookies that nobody will eat because the baker is an auditor. The steward shows you how to keep impressions in orderly rows. He drags a reed lightly to score faint guidelines, nothing dramatic, just a whisper grid so your marks won't wander off like lambs through a fence gap. Joke 1 arrives wearing a smirk. Congratulations, you've unlocked Graphic Design, Mesopotamian Edition, where every font is clay and kerning is a damp thumb. A mainstream fact settles by your elbow as if it had been invited for tea. In the late Uruk period, around the 4th millennium, BCE's closing stretch archaeologists begin finding numerical tablets and tablets with token impressions, especially at Uruk and Susa. Instead of enclosing tokens inside a bulla, administrators often press representative tokens onto the outside of a tablet to declare counts, sometimes with or without the tokens themselves being enclosed. It's the administrative equivalent of writing the shopping list on the bag before you put the groceries in. You experiment with composition. First row, 5 cone impressions for 5 measures of barley. Second row, 2 lentils for 2 measures of oil. Third row, a solitary ovoid, dignified and slightly smug, for livestock. The steward taps the edge where your rows meet. Space means something, he murmurs. So you add a thin, separating line, barley's calm fence, oil's neat fence, sheep's single fence until the tablet reads like a little garden of meaning. The sensation is novel. Numbers have come out of their envelope and learned to stand on their own neat footprints. On the far side of the table sits a basket of tokens with carved slashes, the complex ones you saw earlier. The scribe encourages a trial. Press a plain cone for raw barley, then press a slashed cone for malted barley. The difference on the tablet is visible, tactile, persuasive. It is hard to lie to a surface that now remembers texture as well as shape. You try not to grin like someone who just discovered bold and italics. A courier brings in a bulla due to be opened. Before the steward breaks it, he asks you to press the story of inside onto a fresh tablet. You rattle the bulla next to your ear very gently and think you can guess the heft. The steward raises a warning eyebrow in the key of no percussion audits, and you set it down. Then, seal bands acknowledged, witnesses nodding, He cracks the sphere. Tokens glitter with that dull, fired gleam, and you press each one onto the tablet in tidy succession. When you finish, he pushes the tokens into a tray and strings the empty bulla fragments onto a cord, a small ossuary of promises kept. The tablet remains flat, portable, loyal to its impressions. You've made the quiet leap from container to content. A quirky tidbit pads across the scene on tiny feet. As you set the tablet onto the drying shelf, you notice a faint paw print already fossilized near the corner, delicate and perfectly spaced. Somewhere between the reed tray and the sunbeam, a temple cat performed an unlicensed quality inspection. It is not the first time. Every few weeks, someone lifts a tablet and sighs. Yes, that is the cat's opinion. The steward shrugs. All signatures are personal. Joke 2. The cat has invented peer review and will nap through revisions. The scribe uses his stylus not to write yet, but to add small dots beside certain impressions, place markers, tallies, little breath marks that clarify, this set totals 6, or these belong to the same delivery. He isn't drawing pictures of barley. He's managing the rhythm of your impressions so a future reader can hear the count at a glance. Historians still argue whether these transitional tablets recorded commodities through token-shape impressions alone, through early numerical notations that abstracted quantity, or through both at once depending on office habit and the morning's patience. Either way, you feel the hinge moving under your hands. Outside, a breeze wanders in smelling of wet reeds and bread. The steward demonstrates archiving. He aligns your tablet with others on a shelf. Same month, same office, same type of transaction. Each tablet gets a quick seal roll along the edge, a ribbon that says who touched it last and who may touch it next. On some days, the office adds a clay tag with a hanging hole, the Mesopotamian equivalent of a sticky note that refuses to curl. You tie one on and discover the satisfaction of a tab that actually tabs. You ask the boring, beautiful question, why impressions at all if we still trust bulla? The steward smiles into his beard. To move quicker, he says. With impressed tablets, clerks can replicate the inside truth of a bulla without carrying the tokens around the city. A messenger with a tablet moves lighter, and a shelf with flat records stacks easier than a tray of rattling moons. The goat, now assigned to calibration supervision, demonstrates approval by not chewing anything critical for a whole minute. This is, in goat metrics, a standing ovation. Your hands find a rhythm. Dab a wet palm across the surface to keep it receptive. Press token. Lift. Leave a clean outline. Score a light guide. Move to the next row. A child shadowing the scribe watches you with large, solemn eyes, and then imitates your presses onto a lump of practice clay. Her row is wobbly, exuberant, and perfect. The steward gives her a scrap of reed and a job title large enough to last until lunch. A mainstream detail trots in, tidy and sure-footed. Many of these early impressed tablets are content summaries of what once lived inside bulla, an externalized copy that can be checked without breaking seals. Over time, the summaries become the record itself, and tokens retreat toward retirement. In the corner, a jar of retired tokens glows like a small museum of skills that taught the city how to think out loud. Your tablet work grows bolder. You try layout variations. Left column for incoming goods, right column for outgoing, top row for the day, second for the watch. You find that when you press evenly and space generously, the tablet explains itself to strangers. When you crowd and smudge, it becomes an anxious whisper. Clay is a patient teacher of typography. Line weight matters, white space is not empty, and fingerprints, while charming, are not a font. Joke 3. You almost name the layout Uruk sans, but the steward vetoes branding. As the light leans amber, the textile steward arrives with a query pinned to the corner of her voice. Could she carry just the tablet as her receipt rather than a bulla plus tablet? The scribe considers. For today, he says, take both. Tomorrow, perhaps we try one. The city's courage expands by millimeters, the safest unit of revolution. Scholars still debate whether the shift from bulla to standalone tablets happened as a neat replacement, as a long overlap, or as a messy patchwork that differed by office and season. You suspect the third, because nothing in Uruk likes to sprint unless it has hooves. You finish the last piece of the day, a compact tablet that records a small but fussy exchange of oil, barley, and fleece. You line impressions like tiny doors, and then add a single seal roll across the blank margin, a quiet amen to a page you can touch. When you lay it on the shelf, the row looks like a street at dusk. Similar facades, different lives, everyone accounted for. The steward wipes his hands, and in the pause after the work you can feel what has changed. The city has learned to make a picture of quantity without carrying the quantity itself. On your way out, you pass the bulla tray and touch one of the sealed spheres. It is still beautiful, a rattle of trust wrapped in signatures, but it no longer has a monopoly on proof. The tablet beside it is thinner, calmer, and somehow more conversational. It doesn't ask you to break anything to hear it speak. You take that sound with you, the sound of a token's shape becoming a mark shape, of inventory trading bodies for footprints, and walk into evening, confident that the next step will ask you to trade footprints for wedges. But not yet. For now, you are content to leave your fingerprints where they belong, as small moons in the corners of clay that remembers who taught it to talk. The steward places a clean tablet before you and hands over a reed stylus trimmed on the bias. Its tip a little triangle waiting to become a sentence. You test it on your thumb and feel the spring of cut reed, the tiny resistance that will turn pressure into shape. No more pressing tokens like stamps. Now you press the tool that used to press the tokens. You tilt the stylus and lay in your first neat triangle, a crisp wedge that looks like a raindrop that forgot to be round. The clay accepts it with a sigh. Angle once and you get a vertical wedge. Turn your hand and you make a horizontal. Rotate slightly, and the oblique arrives, polite and decisive. A mainstream fact lands confidently. By the late 4th millennium BCE, administrators in places like Uruk begin writing with wedge impressions proto-cuneiform, using combinations of these small strokes to record numbers, commodities, measures, workers, and offices. You learn the ductus order and direction of strokes, the way a baker learns to fold. For a barley line, you press a string of little verticals, spacing them as you would breaths. For a bigger unit, a different numerical sign joins, compact and steady. The steward taps your wrist when you press too deep. Let the clay keep its dignity, he says. You try lighter, and the wedges sharpen from soggy footprints into crisp footprints, less cow in a marsh, more cat in soft ash. Joke 1 arrives with a straight face. Congratulations, you now have 3 fonts, vertical, horizontal, oblique, and the city will expect layout. You mark a tidy column, number sign, then the commodity sign, then a metrological complement. That's the new grammar quantity plus thing plus how we measured it so a stranger can read the line without asking where the tokens are. A scribe slides a tablet beside yours. On it, a compact cluster stands for barley. You hear him mutter shay. And nearby a sign for beer, kosh, perches like a friendly jar. You copy, carefully, feeling how pictures begin to turn into conventions. Historians still argue whether these earliest signs already encoded the Sumerian language as words, or whether they operated as semantically tagged numbers, a kind of structured label that hinted at speech but didn't quite write it yet. You do not solve the dispute tonight. You simply press wedges and watch the room get readable. Your stylus needs upkeep. The steward shows you how to nip the tip with a shell flake, then burnish it on your thumbnail until edges gleam. A quirky tidbit sidles in. Some scribes chew the reed a little to get the fibers to flare just so, an artisanal sin everyone pretends not to see. You try the chew, immediately regret the taste of river and sunshine, and return to the honorable thumbnail method. Beside the tools sits a damp sponge to smooth mistakes, spell check in its first form. You drag it once over a bad line, level the bed, and begin again. The tablet forgives you with embarrassing generosity. The steward lays out numerical tables, place values are still in the future here, but base 60 already hums in the metrology. You rehearse a lovely trick. Let a tiny wedge stand for 1, a cluster for 10, a different cluster for 60, and combine calmly. The page becomes a garden of small regularities. When your spacing wobbles, the line looks tipsy. When you breathe with the count 1, 2, 3, the wedges steady themselves. Joke 2 knocks softly. You promise to teach your handwriting to sit up straight. Your handwriting files a counter tablet requesting beer. You test the freedom this tool grants. Instead of hauling tokens or stamping their shapes, you compress meaning into ordered strokes. You can repeat a number without hunting for the right pile, annotate rations with a sign for male or female, add a shift sign for day or night, and tack on an office mark so accountability knows where to sleep. A mainstream detail pads in. Alongside commodity and number signs, proto-cuneiform tablets already teem with administrative markers, titles, professions, institutions, most of them still pictographic at heart, but sliding toward abstraction like boats gliding from shore to current. The scribe demonstrates the rotation habit. He turns your tablet 90 degrees and writes across the face in tidy bands, then flips another so the wedges align in a different direction, explaining that conventions drift over centuries until later periods fix a left to right, top to bottom order of strokes. You realize script is not just signs, it's choreography. Hands agree how to move, and readers agree how to follow. Historians still argue whether the famous 90-degree rotation became standard all at once or slowly, office by office, the way a city decides to like a new pastry. You copy a small list: 10 silas of barley to the weaver's court, 2 bands of oil to the boat team, 1 ewe credited to the shepherd whose seal looks like a parade with an enthusiastic dog. Your wedges line up, your breath evens. The tablet in your hands becomes light not by weight, but by burden, because you can make a proof without a pouch, a shelf without a tray, a promise without a rattle. The goat strolls past, pretends to audit, and magnanimously does not eat the corner. Joke 3 bows. Autocorrect has evolved into goat to correct, which mostly deletes snacks. The steward points to a corner where lexical lists nap on a warm shelf, rows of signs for fish, birds, vessels, jobs. We rehearse the world, he says, so we don't have to argue with it every morning. You are tempted to peek, but you save school for later. A different night will seat you at the Adaba. For now, you stay loyal to this hinge. Impressions turning into wedges, tokens becoming signs, memory stepping outside the pocket and standing up straight on clay. Another quirky whisper. Apprentices sometimes sign exercises with a tiny self-portrait. Just a wedge smile tucked in a margin until a teacher notices and assigns extra practice in serious eyebrows. By lamplight, your tablet dries to a leathery firmness, neither mush nor brick. You run a reed down the edge to bevel it. Grace is also legibility, and roll a short seal on the margin to certify authorship. A mainstream fact closes the lesson. Over the 3rd millennium BCE, cuneiform blossoms into a full writing system used for Sumerian and, later, Akkadian. Phonetic values, syllables via the rebus trick, join logograms, and the script escapes the storeroom into hymns, letters, laws, and epics. You feel the door swing wider, yet your feet stay on tonight's threshold where accounting taught the hand to speak. You set the tablet beside the earlier impressed ones and, for a moment, listen to the difference. The token-impressed tablet murmurs, "What was inside?" The wedge tablet says, "What is?" without reference to a pouch. The city has learned to whisper realities directly, and tomorrow night, when the granary counts barley in and rations out, those whispers will meet moonlight, and the moonlight will take notes. You rub a dot of clay from your knuckle like a punctuation mark you no longer need, and carry the stylus carefully, a small reed that, in the right hand, keeps the river of numbers from flooding the courtyards. By dusk, you reach the granary, a long, cool rectangle of mud brick where doors breathe out the day's wheat dust sigh. A porter wipes his hands on a reed mat and lifts the bar. The clay seal at the latch carries yesterday's ribbon of figures. He shows you the intact roll as if showing a heartbeat, then presses his thumb beside the impression today's witness to yesterday's promise and eases the door open. Lamps bloom along the walls, little suns with quiet intentions. Everyone speaks in audit voice. Low, steady, more lullaby than lecture. Inside, bins rise like sleeping barges. Each is lined with reed mats and a smear of bitumen where the corners like to crumble. A steward touches a weight mina, shekel, the familiar family, and you feel your shoulders loosen. The same old bass 6-0 lullaby, now humming in barley. A mainstream fact arrives with practical shoes. Across Mesopotamia, administrators recorded barley in and rations out on clay tablets, sealing doors and sacks with cylinder seals so entries could be verified against physical stores. You inhale the scent of dry grain, warm, cereal. Faintly sweet, and make a promise to sneeze later, quietly, into your elbow. Like a professional. The team works in pairs. One measures sila by sila into a standard ban jar. The other calls numbers and nudges a counting tablet forward, wedge by wedge. You take the spot at the verification table, where a sampling tray waits with a reed sieve, a small scoop, and a short list of today's suppliers. You're told to listen to grain. When it's dry enough, it sings like sand. When it's damp, it whispers like dough. You try both and pretend your ear has always been this wise. Joke 1. You get promoted to manager of acoustic cereal, which looks excellent on a tablet until the cat walks across it. A runner brings in a bulla strung at the hip, rattle discreet but definite. It's last week's pledge from a village storehouse upriver. We're to reconcile it now that the boats have come in. The steward checks the seal bands, turns to you, and waits. Your hands already remember. Present the bulla, announce the parties, crack it with witnesses, count the released tokens into neat families, press a confirming tablet with numerical signs, then marry the signs to the bodies, barley in jars, oil in jars, and tick the ledger where the line has been waiting like a held breath. Historians still argue whether such audits happened on fixed schedules, in response to festivals, or as spot checks when roads and rumors suggested mischief. Tonight, schedule and rumor have decided to hold hands. Across the room, a boy with a reed spoon performs the old moisture test that may or may not have been written down anywhere he bites a kernel, winces at the hardness, and declares it honest. A quirky tidbit sidles in. Some tablets and bricks bear tiny paw prints and sandal treads. Audit nights, like all nights, have uninvited signatures. On cue, the temple cat installs itself by the warmest lamp and supervises your arithmetic with eyes that refuse to be impressed. You settle into the rhythm. A bin is unsealed, the clay plug eased out with a hushed pop, and the first ban jar descends like a bucket into a tame well. Two helpers hold the reed screen at the lip so chaff and little stones lose the argument before barley wins the jar. The measurer sweeps level with a wet palm, sila by sila, then tilts into a larger barig container. 6 bands complete the barig. 5 barigs climb into a gur, which somebody marks with a neat wedge cluster that makes your wrist jealous. Joke 2. You nearly applaud a particularly clean leveling stroke, then remember that the only acceptable clapping in a granary is the slap of clay stoppers. You chase numbers through the ledger. Incoming from boat 3, 2 gurs and 1 barig. Outgoing rations to the loom court. 1 gur. Festival allocation pending. Half a gur. The tablet absorbs this ballet without complaint number, commodity, measure sign, office sign, and your breath learns to exhale at the same tempo as the stylus. A porter sets a jar of beer at your elbow, and you practice professional restraint by drinking slowly enough that the ledger won't list you as liquid assets. The steward announces a reconciliation run. He takes up yesterday's summary tablet, flat proof the older bulla fragments strung as a necklace of promise kept, and the fresh counts you've just impressed. One by one, he checks the families. Barley matches tokens, oil matches tokens, wool scripts, small slashed lentils, match exactly the to-be-issued line for tomorrow's weavers. A mainstream detail slides into place. Ration tablets from later periods commonly list barley and beer allotments per worker, often by role and sex. What you feel here is the prelude, the habit of equity rehearsed in grain before it becomes a table of names. The goat reappears at the doorway like a rumor in a polite hat. Someone closes the gate chain and seals it with a fast clay lump rolled under 2 seals. You smile at the memory of 2-factor clay authentication and return to your line. Incoming, outgoing, remainder. The remainder is the granary's sleep, the number that lets everyone unclench. When your wedges say it correctly, The walls seem to lean less. When they don't, the walls inhale. A courier from the textile court arrives with a query wrapped in patience. Could tomorrow's rations shift slightly because a loom needs retying and the night crew will double up? You adjust the outgoing line by 2 bands, add a note signifying night watch, and seal the edge with your short ribbon. Historians still argue whether such flexibility means these households operated with real autonomy or whether every adjustment echoed a central plan. Your table shrugs like a sensible person. Either way, the lambs still need counting and the looms still need breakfast. You test the grain once more with the sieve and learn a smell you will chase for days. Clean barley after a long ride river. Sun. A hint of boat rope. A porter brings in a sack with suspicious enthusiasm. The steward slices the tie. A little avalanche produces a few smooth pebbles the size of regrets. You set them aside with calm theater and write a tiny wedge note that means, less the stones. Joke 3. You christen the trade geology department and give it tenure. Near midnight, the audit reaches that quiet hum where everyone moves as if they've practiced in dreams. The door is resealed after each bin. The lamp wicks are trimmed with a patient fingernail, and the counting tablet gets a modest border of empty space, the visual equivalent of a sigh. The cat stretches and accidentally endorses the barley with a tail signature. You consider adding feline oversight to the margin. Then remember margins are not for poetry. The steward calls the final total. Incoming, 3 gurs, 4 barigs. Outgoing, 1 gur, 2 bands. Remainder, 2 gurs, 4 barigs, 4 bands, plus a handful of dignified silas that someone rounds respectfully. You press the figures, add the commodity sign, and append a small office mark for Granary East. The cylinder seals perform their last slow parade along the edge, and the tablets take their places on the shelf. Today's on top, yesterday's beneath, a thin city made of promises hardened in air. Before you leave, the steward walks you along the sealed doors. Each lump bears a record of whose hands closed it, and the corridor becomes a gallery of accountability. Hunts, banquets, gods, abstract curls, personal myths, keeping watch over public bread. You run a fingertip over one band and feel the same small chill you felt with bulla. Identity translated into texture. Away on the dock, a boat coughs a rope free. The river turns in its sleep. Outside, the night is river cool and moth soft. The porter lowers the bar, and you sign the last tablet by the light of a stubborn star. Your eyes sting from lamp smoke, but your mind floats with numbers that have made their beds. Rations will flow at dawn, the loom court will hum, the shepherd will trade wool for barley with less arguing and more nodding, and the calibration shelf will endure the goat's reforms with stoic grace. You tuck the stylus behind your ear and feel, for the thinnest silver of a moment, that the city is a single long breath you are quietly helping to count. You rise before the sun finishes its stretch and meet the flock at the pen where reed walls keep the night's warm breath. A porter taps the clay plug at the gate, shows the unbroken ribbon of the shepherd's cylinder seal, and lifts the bar the way a careful hand lifts a lid. Bells stir, wool sighs. You balance a tablet on your knee, stylus tucked behind your ear, and rehearse the headings the steward drilled last night. Ewes, rams, lambs, kids, births, deaths, shearings, transfers, remainder. You are not here to tame the morning. You are here to listen to it and turn it into calm wedges. The first silhouettes press forward, noses low, as if the day were something you could smell before you could count. You steady the clay with your palm and let your breathing find the count it likes. Use first, because the future lives there. They file through a narrow accounting door, and you press neat vertical wedges into damp clay-like breaths. 10, 20, 30 base 60 returning as quietly as tide. When a mother hustles 2 lambs like a slow comet with satellites, you add the complement sign so the ration column remembers halves. A mainstream fact, whispered so it doesn't spook the animals. Thousands of Mesopotamian tablets, especially in the Ur-3 period, record sheep and goats, accounts that track ewes, rams, lambs, births, deaths, and wool yields with serene specificity. Your column begins to look like a fence made of patience. A lamb blunders into your ankle and corrects course with an apology bleat. You accept the apology on behalf of the ledger. A helper reads pasture tags as bodies pass blue knot for the north meadow, plain for canal side, doubled for the kiln scrub. You give each subgroup space, the way fences give grass a rest. The spacing steadies your wrist. Numbers breathe better when they're not nose to nose. Historians still argue whether flocks like this were mostly temple property with occasional private partners, or a tighter braid where institutions and households shared risk and fleece more fluidly than our tidy labels allow. Your tablet declines to take sides. It prefers verbs like arrive and remain. The first ram halts in the doorway, a glowering punctuation mark with horns. The dog submits a polite counter-argument. You give rams their own column, because breeding plans and ration scales expect the dignity of categories. The ram would like a corner office and a better bell. You promote him to head of loudness and move on before he schedules a meeting. His beard twitches with what you generously interpret as appreciation for administrative efficiency. You log his weight class in the margin and carry on, because bells only ring so long before they become scenery. Lamb math turns wonderfully wiggly. Newborns count as halves until weaning, then as wholes. You press the little half mark and feel the ledger smile at your caution. A quirky tidbit pads in on soft hooves. Some tablets note causes for losses: dead by cold, dead by disease, occasionally dead by lion. A sober roll that still reads like the world trying to keep its balance. You keep today's line blessedly empty and touch wood, which is mostly reed, which absolutely counts when you're sleepy. The shepherd murmurs a running total under his breath as if soothing the arithmetic. You match his melody with wedges and air. At the shearing frame, wool moves like weather. Shearers talk in that low, rhythmic way of hands that know what they're doing. A basket catches fleece. A cord gathers it. A weight certifies it, mina by mina. 60 shekels to the mina. Your wrist joins the beat. Commodity sign, weight, destination. Some goes to the textile court, some to offerings, some to padding jar shoulders so fragile cargo rides without bruises. Lanolin from yesterday still softens your knuckles. Your notes smell faintly like a very diligent candle. You jot a reminder to fetch tail fat for the chaptan crew. Fat-tailed breeds are generous like that, and tuck the reminder under kindnesses that keep ledgers honest. Mid-morning wants a snapshot. You read the tablet, as if reciting weather. Ewes 180, rams 24, lambs 60, 2, kids 9, wool 3 minas, 40 shekels, transfers to looms 1 mina, 10, remainder 2 minas, 30. The steward nods once and taps the margin with a nail. Your columns sit up straighter, as though a teacher just walked past. A boy carries water in a 2-handled jar and announces that the cat has joined the audit by sleeping exactly where the sunbeam says approved. You mark nothing about cats, but you do press a tidy seal on the edge to certify the morning's calm. A runner delivers a bulla from the North Pasture supervisor, rattling discreetly. You perform the dance, verify bands, break with witnesses, pour the tokens, translate them into wedges, 10 lentils for oil paid to shearers, 5 cones for grain requested for lamb mash, 1 ovoid for a breeding ram on loan. 2-factor clay authentication earns a satisfied grunt from the shepherd. Promises now have both sound and shape. The messenger strings the broken shards like a small necklace of honesty and trots off toward the weighing court. You inhale the smell of dust and sun-stirred wool and return to your column with a steadier hand. Noon asks the flock to shade, and you follow under an awning that smells like last year's river. You sort the sheep and goats account into polite families. Incoming births, currently halves. Outgoing, 2 rams transferred to another fold. Destination marked. Shearings, weights, and recipients. Losses none reported. A sentence you write with 2 extra breaths for luck. Historians still argue whether tidy tallies like these reflect ideal quotas retrofitted onto messy pasture reality, or whether they mirror the day closely enough to steer looms and kitchens without grumbling. Your tablet, again, prefers verbs. Issue, feed, sleep. Afternoon brings the clop of hooves on packed dust and the gentle percussion of bells. You tally the return from a hillside paddock. The same mothers, the same satellites, minus 1 wanderer who reappears 2 minutes later with a reed stuck to her forehead like a civic badge. You add recovered in the margin. It is not standardized, but it makes the steward laugh through his nose, a sound like a tiny bellows. You award the U Employee of the Watch, which comes with a congratulatory scratch and absolutely no change in salary. The goat, on calibration duty, declines to eat the clay tags for a full minute and earns an unspoken promotion to almost helpful. The pen becomes a small office. Clay tags pile in a basket. Broken ones collect in a saucer, like shed assumptions. A junior scribe drafts a duplicate tablet so the day can travel if you cannot. The temple cat arranges itself under your bench like a letter you haven't learned to read. You work around its tail, which occasionally endorses a column with a faint fur-line future scholars may catalog as feline cursive. A mainstream detail pads in wearing dusty sandals. Many sheep and goats tablets list not only counts, but expected yield so many minas of wool per 100 ewes, adjusted by season and rain's generosity. You add a modest forecast and underline it. The loom mistress appears, nods, and dispatches a runner to shift night rations by half a ban. Numbers ripple outward like wind on a canal and return as cloth. Near sunset, the assistant brings the day's small epics. One lamb born in the cool just before dawn, counted now. One kid with a cough, set aside for the healer. One ewe who slipped a cord and led a brisk parade before reconsidering leadership. You fold these into the ledger with the empathy of someone who knows numbers are polite masks for real weather. By habit, you do one last pass, tying columns like reeds in a mat, opening totals, additions, subtractions, remainder. The math purrs. Rations for the night grain mash by sila. Water by jar match the granary notes with the serenity of a well-made knot. You roll your seal along the edge, a ribbon that says you will answer for this page. You press a tiny clay plug over the gate cord's knot and roll the shepherd's seal across it, the two of you standing as quiet witnesses while the day closes behind settled bells. The flock regathers into a woolen continent. You sit on the threshold and rest your hands, which smell of reed, lanolin, and damp earth, the same trio that perfumed the storeroom, the measuring court, and the granary. Continuity is a real perfume here. When the last light tilts off the tablet, you speak the remainder for the walls that like endings done properly. Ewes 180, 2, rams 24, lambs 60, 3, kids 10, wool remainder 2 minas, 30 shekels, losses none, transfers 2 rams. The numbers settle like birds in a tree. You place the tablet beside the granary account, watch the margins kiss, and promise yourself an early night. Joke 3. You finally count sheep to fall asleep, only to realize the sheep are now waiting for you to finish the paperwork in your dreams. You sign, you smile, you stand. You follow the barley from numbers to mouths, which is to say from the granary's hush to the kitchen's steam. The loom court has sent a runner with a palm-sized tablet listing today's cruise, and you're to assemble rations so the shuttles hum through the night. You set your larger tablet on a smooth bench, breathe once in base 6-0, and begin a calm chorus of wedges. Unit, commodity, measure, recipient. The reed stylus finds its sleepy tempo tap for sila, longer press for ban while jars line up like polite planets waiting their orbits. Bureaucracy is about to turn into dinner, which is the best kind of magic. First, you sketch the categories the steward likes. Adult weavers, junior assistants, spindle spinners, dyers on light duty, the fumes argue with large rations, and the night watch with eyebrows qualified to frighten goats. The mainstream fact arrives with the certainty of a weighed mina. Mesopotamian ration tablets, especially from the Ur-3 period, often list barley and beer allowances scaled by role, sex, and age, roughly 1 to 2 silas of barley per worker per day, with adjustments for pregnant women or heavy labor. You write modest, kind numbers. A city running on cloth must also run on breakfast. Along the wall, the cook tips barley into a gackle-style strainer set over a ban jar. Husks sigh away, leaving a liquid that smells like bread learning to sing. You assign the brewer's team their share malt for wort, Bapir loaves to crumble, time and warmth to persuade sweetness into beer. In a corner, A hymn to a goddess of brewing is half remembered by an apprentice, something about dough and honeyed wort. You don't write the hymn, you write the math that lets the hymn be sung. Beer here is nourishment and hygiene both, a safer sip than the river that occasionally forgets to be polite. You build the list in rows that feel like shelves. Adult weavers, 1.5 silas of barley, plus beer by the cup that pretends it is a bowl. Juniors, 1 sila and a generous scoop at dusk when the lamps tempt yawns. Dyers, 1 sila, extra bread rations if the vat shifts to indigo tomorrow. The night watch, 1.5 silas and a small pride of salted fish if the boat returns by dusk. The steward peers over your shoulder and taps a space you left between lines. White space is mercy, he says. You like it when your typography agrees with ethics. A quirky tidbit tiptoes in on long reads. Some drinkers here use straws so tall they could eavesdrop on the moon. Communal beer jars love these reads. They dodge the sediment resting like a sleepy cat at the bottom. Centuries later, fancy metal versions will gleam in royal tombs. But tonight, it's simple reed. A slender ladder from lips to barley weather. You add a small note, straws to loom court, and the brewer smiles with the look of someone already thanked for tomorrow. You pause to convert the day's barley into the useful fiction of calories. A gur is 300 silas. A crew of 80 adults at 1.5 silas a day wants 120 silas. A night watch of 12 wants 18. Juniors want 40. The dyers take 20. You tally. Then add the brewer's claim and the inevitable crumbs for mice and gods, which the steward edits to loss allowance with a professor's patience. Historians still argue whether these rations functioned as wages in a redistributive system or as subsistence allowances inside dependency, and whether the scales reflected ideal nutrition or negotiable reality when harvests sulked. You press your line with a breath that tastes like bread anyway. The bread crew needs bowls of barley dough, some to bake twice into dense bapir, the brewer's favorite crumb, some to bake once for loaves that thump like gentle drums when tapped. You record loaves in tidy equivalences, so many loaves equal 1 sila of grain, and preface the count with the quiet sign your office uses for issued. Joke 1 rises like steam. You mentally promote yourself to Chief of Carbohydrates, which is the happiest HR title you have ever imagined. The cat approves, possibly because carbohydrates often fall from tables. A runner from the brickyard appears, respectfully dusty, requesting an emergency ration bump. The kiln will run the cool hours, and sweaty hands prefer bread that answers back. You check your remainder from last section's audit, shift 2 bands, and append the office sign for kiln court, satisfied that the ledgers echo the city without echoing so loud they distort. You press the cylinder seal along the edge 2-factor clay authentication for carbs, and pass the tablet to the porter, who ties a clay tag through the basket cord like a bow that studied geometry. Now the lists for non-humans, because civilization includes stomachs on 4 legs. The temple donkeys that hauled barley today earn mash. The herding dog receives a dignified scrap. The goats are offered nothing resembling a document. Joke 2. You inform the calibration goat that its ration is absolutely no tablets, and it writes an angry letter by attempting to eat the corner of your sleeve. You countersign with a shoe. The brewer asks you to reconcile malt with bapir, a calm algebra of sweetness. You mark an incoming line for date syrup from a boat that smells like orchards, then balance it with outgoing jars to the singer who will lead the evening hymn. The numbers hum. You find yourself writing smaller, as if shrinking the wedges will soften the night's edges. The steward catches this and places a finger on the line height. Clarity is kindness, he says again, and you let the letters stretch their legs. You pass through the ovens where loaves learn to keep their shape and note the bread counts against your barley lines. So many rounds to the loom hall, so many flatbreads to the dye yard, a handful of sweetened cakes to the adubba to bribe arithmetic into behaving. A mainstream detail steps forward like a friend. Many ration tablets enumerate specific outputs, loaves, beer measures tied to named teams and time windows, so audits can walk backward from mouth to granary without breaking a sweat. You sign the page with your short seal and feel the new lightness that comes when a system can be checked by strangers. Twilight lowers its voice. You carry the tablets to the pegboard, hang their clay tags by office, and listen to the kitchen's exhale. The weavers collect baskets with the solemn joy of people who know thread breaks less when breakfast doesn't. The night watch lingers for their beers, reeds dip. Conversation discovers the octave between joke and prayer. You pencil in tomorrow's forecast. If the North Canal delivers well, the dyers can have their extra scoop. If the sheep ledger stays sweet, wool rations for the fulling crew will match your earlier promise. Joke 3. You mutter, balanced diet means bread in both hands, and the brewer who has excellent timing slides a cup into the space between them. Before you leave, you return to the calibration shelf weights aligned, jars nested, and set a single pilot tablet there with the first lines of tomorrow's count. The goat eyes it, reconsiders crime, and yawns. You tidy your stylus on your nail, flatten a smudge with the sponge, and tap the rim of a band jar the way you might tap a friend's shoulder. The tap answers with certainty. In the ledger you've drawn, numbers have turned into meals, and meals will turn into cloth, and cloth will turn into warmth that lets children sleep. That's the quiet geometry you came for. Gur to sila, sila to loaf, loaf to song, song to the city remembering itself by heart. Morning lifts like a curtain, and you find yourself in the seal room, where identity hangs on pegs and history smells faintly of polished stone. The steward lays a neat row of cylinders on a reed mat, banded agate with sunrise stripes, dark hematite that drinks the light, a friendly serpentine green as river shade. Each is drilled end to end for a cord. Each bears a tiny world, banquets, hunts, gods with improbable hats, boats sliding like commas. You have seen these rolled across bulla and tablet edges. Today you're here to learn what a seal says about a person and how clay learns to recognize them. You pick one up. It is cool, dense, and smaller than the opinion it carries, which is precisely the point. The cutter's art comes first. The steward shows you a worn tool, a bow drill that once bit stone with a whisper, grit song, tiny gravers that persuaded lines out of hardness, powdered abrasives made from ordinary ground patience. A mainstream fact arrives with the assurance of a clean impression. From the late 4th millennium BCE onward, cylinder seals spread across Mesopotamian offices and households as signatures and security devices. Rolled on wet clay, they produce continuous scenes that certify a person's authority, their role, or the institution behind them. You roll one across a soft practice lump and watch a procession unfurl two figures clasping hands before a god, a singer with a long straw at a beer jar, a goat posed with surprising charisma. Even when the scene repeats, it never feels like a stamp. It feels like a story that forgot how to stop. You practice reading the micro-signature, not just the motif, but the way tiny lines taper, the chip near the lion's tail, the faint flat where the cutter repolished and softened a ridge. The steward embraces his favorite paradox. In a world that wants standardization, uniqueness keeps the standard honest. He lifts a jar stopper with a rolled band and asks you to match it to a seal on the mat. You squint, tilt, hum as if music helps, and finally choose the hematite with the dignified banquet. He nods. Joke 1. Congratulations, you've passed Intro to CSI, Clay Scene Investigation, which mostly involves staring at lions until they confess. Now, to the gentle, dark art how people try to cheat and how the system yawns politely and says, please don't. A messenger brings in a suspect tag. The seal band looks right, but your fingers feel a hitch where the roll should flow. The steward shows you the tell. For good sealers, wrists move like river water. Forgery often stutters. He sprinkles ash lightly on the impression and blows. Dust settles differently on crisp grooves than on clumsy ones, and the picture resolves like a sleepy photograph learning to focus. Historians still argue whether forgery was common enough to shape daily habits, or whether most safeguards evolved from ceremony and caution rather than crime. Either way, offices learn to layer proofs. You already know one layer. 2. Factor clay authentication, your ribbon plus mine. Today you add a third. Witnesses whose seals roll alongside yours in a thin, approving chorus. He strings you a scenario. A storage room door is tied with cord. Over the knot, A clay lump sits like a small moon. Across it, 3 seals: parade shepherd, steward, doorkeeper. You, arriving late with a delivery, want to open it. The right way. Call the doorkeeper, roll fresh ceilings after the door wakes, and record the event on a tablet that will nap on the edge shelf. The wrong way, well, the goat proposes the wrong way by trying to eat the knot. You shoo the goat. Joke 2. The goat claims it is testing tamper evidence. The steward assigns it to a lifelong fellowship in not helping. The steward produces a drawer of reference impressions, clay strips pressed with each employee's seal and dated when they joined the office. You thumb through the archive and feel a peculiar warmth. The city keeps a memory of who you are, not just what you promised. A quirky tidbit wanders in wearing jewelry. Many seals hang on cords as necklaces or wrist loops. They are both tool and ornament, both password and pocket myth. Some are carved with prayers, some with titles, some with the sort of aspirational lions people wear when they secretly identify as well-fed house cats. You glance at the actual temple cat asleep on the shelf and whisper, "No offense," which the cat accepts by not moving. An apprentice enters with a new cylinder, fresh from a cutter whose eyes probably outstare stone. The steward demonstrates induction. First, roll the cylinder onto a practice strip. Then roll the same onto a tablet edge. Then onto a clay tag. Then cut the tags back with a diagonal hatch that says, "Authorized duplicate for reference." He strings the reference among the others. "If we lose the stone," he says, "we retire the identity." Historians still argue whether a lost seal invalidated all past transactions or only triggered a polite notice to be extra watchful. Either way, fear of mischief writes good procedures. You try the witness braid. A shepherd brings wool to the loom court. He rolls his seal on the clay tag. You roll yours as issuing scribe. The loom mistress rolls hers for receipt. A junior scribe adds a small office sign. 4 bands like 4 handshakes tighten the story. The steward then rotates the tag under the light to check that each band crosses the seam over the knot, not just the surface. If a band floats without touching the vulnerability, it's pretty but useless, like putting a lock on a door nobody planned to open. Joke 3. You quietly award yourself Best Seam Awareness, Day Shift, which is less glamorous than it sounds and exactly as satisfying. You learn the difference between stamp and cylinder. Stamp's little buttons or pendants press a single image in one push, quick and tidy for small notes, casual approvals, and non-roll surfaces. Cylinders, with their looping stories, shine on doors, jars, bulla, any place that benefits from a continuous fence of identity. The steward keeps both within reach because some days want parades and some days want a signature that just taps and leaves. He presses a stamp seal shaped like a tiny lion. The impression is adorable and ferocious at once, which is also how the cat describes itself on performance reviews. Fraud scenarios continue with theater that never gets old because it never fully ends. Someone tries to roll a genuine seal over an old impression to mask a seam, double rolling leaves, a moire, a flutter that trained eyes spot even in mothlight. Someone tries to cut a dried seal off a cord and glue it onto another brittle clay fractures like bad gossip when it's moved. Wet clay leaves fingerprints when it's faked. The steward points to a jar whose stopper shows a mysterious thumb near the edge. "I know that thumb," he says, and calls the porter, who blushes the color of damp brick. No lecture follows, just a demonstration of resealing done right, which is both kinder and harder to forget. You sit with a scribe comparing 2 impressions from the same cylinder made months apart. Stone ages, cutters sharpen, wrists change their favorite coffee. The later roll shows a softened goat beard and a tiny nick that wasn't there before. You add a note to the reference strip post-repair in wedge shorthand so future knights won't spend an hour accusing a goat of identity theft. The goat, it must be said, would absolutely steal an identity if that identity were spelled snack. The steward opens a small basket of seal blanks, undecorated cylinders waiting for life. He rolls one across clay, and it yawns. "Empty," he says, like a jar without a label. You picture what yours would show if you earned one: an obedient stylus, a friendly jar, 2 weights holding hands, perhaps a goat with a no sign. The cutter would refuse your design on aesthetic grounds, but still, the idea blooms. A portable autobiography you can roll onto reality whenever reality needs a reminder of who spoke. That's what these tools are, not power by volume, but identity by texture. Before you leave, the steward rehearses one last safeguard, the audit tablet that captures which seals rolled where today. A simple list: door east, doorkeeper, steward, wool crate 5, shepherd, loom mistress, scribe, granary north bin, porter, steward, cat. The cat's contribution is strictly supervisory. The record doesn't stop fraud by itself. It makes honesty legible and dishonesty inconvenient, which is often enough to let people choose the right story. You press your seal on the edge and feel the pleasant shiver of being included in the city's texture. Evening drifts in with moths like punctuation. You hang the seals back on their pegs, cords straight, stones cool against the wall. The room smells of reed dust and a mineral patience that outlives quarreling. You think of bulla rattling, of tablets lined like little houses, of doors sleeping under braided signatures. You think of the weavers whose cloth will wrap a child, the brewer whose jars will keep a worker kind, the shepherd whose rams believe in meetings. And you think of the tiny lions that protect all this not by roaring, but by leaving a line so delicate and exact that tomorrow can recognize it without argument. You close the notebook in your head and let the seal room dim. Outside, a breeze worries the calibration shelf where weights nap like pebble ducks. The goat sighs and does not eat anything for a heroic 5 seconds. The cat blinks, approves your character, and returns to the administrative business of dreaming. When you breathe, you can feel the day roll across your own edges, leaving its ribbon of meaning. You are, at last, a little bit legible to the night. You drift from the seal room into a courtyard where low voices practice the alphabet of wedges the way a choir warms its throat. Lamps throw warm circles on the floor. A row of boys and girls sit at clay desks, really just knees and optimism, while a teacher, sleeves rolled, trims styluses against his thumbnail. Someone has written a perfect line. Someone has sneezed on a tablet and invented meteorology. The Adubba the tablet house teaches by repetition that feels like rain on a roof. Steady, forgiving, and eventually everywhere. You settle among the trainees. Accept a practice tablet the size of a generous biscuit, and let your fingers remember the pressure that turns clay into memory. The teacher nods toward a board of examples. First come numerals and measures the same: sila, ban, barig, and gur that now live in your bones, then the commodity signs, then office marks, then lists that attempt to domesticate the world. Professions in orderly rows, birds in flight captured by names, trees and their uses, cities and the rivers that hire them. A mainstream fact arrives as calmly as a well-leveled jar. Scribal education in Mesopotamia leaned on standardized lexical lists and math exercises. Students copied tables of reciprocals in base 6-0, multiplication tables, and long catalogs: fish, metals, stones, gods, until the hand could write the world without waking the brain too much. You press a line of small numerals and feel the relief of competence, the kind that tastes like warm bread. Your first assignment tonight is a reciprocal table. Friendly fractions that turn division into multiplication. 60 smiling back at you with factors like a market full of cousins. The teacher sings the columns. 2 times 30 is 60, 3 times 20 is 60, and your wedge rhythm falls in alongside. You draw a tiny box around a number pair that pleases you, as if you've discovered polite sarcasm in arithmetic. Joke 1. You whisper to your tablet, "You're my type," and the tablet blushes in dampness. The student beside you coughs a laugh and smears a wedge. The sponge rescues them, as it always does. A junior instructor lays out the profession list, a sleepy parade that includes scribe, brewer, weaver, metalworker, boatman, herdsman, seal cutter, and because the world loves continuity, porter. You copy until the signs stop feeling like pictures and start behaving like habits. Between lines, a quirky tidbit slips in wearing sensible sandals. Many school tablets are two-sided. Novices write the teacher's model on one face and their copy on the other, sometimes flipping orientation like a small storm of convention before the later standardized direction wins. Some tablets are lentil-shaped, one-liners. perfect for memorizing a single word or number family. Others are fat pillow tablets you could nap on if you lacked self-respect and supervision. The teacher makes his rounds with a reed pointer and a cane that is more rumor than instrument this evening. Stories say the cane speaks often. Your knight is gentle. He taps your wrist when your wedges press too deep. Let the clay breathe, he says. The same advice the steward gave your fractions. You lighten the touch and your numerals sober up. In the corner, the temple cat occupies the warmest shelf and performs a rigorous peer review by blinking at excellence and yawning at mediocrity. You accept the critique with gratitude. Lexical lists give way to copywork from model tablets. A short receipt, a ration line, a little note that tells a donkey where to be and when to bray politely. The teacher sets his cylinder seal at the edge of his board like a moon that watches tides. Somewhere in the curriculum, you suspect, a tiny ceremony will roll that seal across a tablet you complete without error, and that will count as a diploma, no tassel, just texture. Historians still argue whether Adaba schools were temple-run, family enterprises run by master scribes, or mixed economies where halls borrowed roofs from shrines and pay from households. The courtyard tonight feels like a community project, where knowledge sits on a reed mat and invites anyone who will bring a lamp. You try a small letter more exactly, a model memorandum. To Silas Barley, to the dyer at dusk. Your hand wants to add a joke. Your training prevents it. You imagine future scribes rolling their eyes at the student who wrote, "and a cookie," and you choose immortality through restraint. The teacher glances, grunts a syllable shaped like approval, and adds a neat metrological compliment so no one will argue ban versus sila in the doorway tomorrow. You inhale the particular pride of making a sentence that moves a meal. Math returns with quiet swagger. A curved tablet exercise offers canal problems. If this channel measures so wide and so deep and must deliver so many silas per watch, how long before the die yard sings? You scratch out the base 6-0 steps, find the reciprocal like a friend in a crowded room, and finish with a number that even your breath believes. The junior instructor stamps a tiny mark, an office quirk, meaning checked, and slides you a date cake the size of gratitude. Joke 2. You promote yourself to assistant to the assistant of flow, which sounds grand until you remember it means you fetch sponges and keep your elbows out of other people's canals. The class breaks rhythm to practice names. Students copy their own, then the courteous formula that says, son divided by daughter of so-and-so, because identity loves context and tablets enjoy introductions. The teacher tells a story from the school day's tradition lunch shared, a teacher's scowl, a father's visit, a cane that argues on behalf of legibility, and everyone murmurs appreciation for the genre while secretly hoping tonight remains a comedy. Your mind drifts to the seal room and back here again, to the way a seal's tiny world rolls across wet clay with authority, while your small wedges rehearse the larger one. An open question tilts its head in the doorway. Historians still argue whether Sumerian was the daily language of these lessons in later periods, or a revered school idiom taught alongside Akkadian. Either way, signs remember both voices when they need to. You hand your tablet to a classmate for peer checking, a ritual the teacher calls making strangers of our errors. They circle a careless wedge with the tip of a reed and hand it back without drama. You sponge, re-level, and try again, discovering that humility is the cheapest writing tool in the room. The cat approves by not leaving footprints on your second draft. Across the courtyard, a pile of old-school tablets slumps like tired hills. When rain returns, many will be recycled, soaked, kneaded, pressed anew because clay is patient with beginners. Quirky fact 2 for your pocket. Archaeologists sometimes find whole dumps of rejected homework, a syllabus of mistakes that reads like comfort. Night deepens, lamps crackle, moths orbit, and someone opens a window onto the river's black shining. The teacher returns the model board to its peg, then asks for a volunteer to recite a metrological ladder. You stand and climb sila, ban, barig, gur, adding the sheepside equivalents like a parenthetical that smells of lanolin. The class claps in the key of "Don't drop your tablet." Joke 3. You bow too dramatically, almost inventing slapstick, but salvage dignity with a recovery step your wedges may annotate as not falling. For a last exercise, you copy a short lexical sequence trees and their uses, 4 entries only, and then write a tiny marginal reminder. Deliver reads to calibration shelf. The goat on duty, if goats can read, will ignore it, but the human porter will not. The teacher rolls his seal once across your edge, not a diploma, just a momentary ribbon that says, "This line belongs." You roll your own small seal beside his, the one with the obedient stylus and the imaginary goat barred by a no, and the clay listens, as clay does, without taking sides. When the class ends, students stack tablets by stage of dampness, tip styluses in a jar, like reeds in a miniature marsh, and rinse sponges in a bowl that makes the room smell briefly like clean rain. You sweep crumbs of clay into a pile for tomorrow's kneading. Another novice smooths the practice board with a wet palm. The teacher ties a cord around the day with the absent-minded grace of someone who has bound a lifetime of evenings this way. You step into the courtyard's cooler air and feel your shoulders carry less and your hands carry more. The adubba has the same ethic as the granary and the flock. Repeat small rightness until big rightness doesn't have to raise its voice. You pass the seal room again on the way out. The stones rest on their pegs like moons that forgot to fall. Somewhere in the dark, a loom begins its night song, the shuttles clicking like polite fingernails on a tabletop. Your tablet, still leathery, rides your palms as carefully as any lamp. On it, a reciprocal smiles, a ration walks, a name bows, and a tree offers shade in the only way clay knows how, by letting memory land and stay. You tilt the board to the lamplight. Check that no moth wings have signed your math, and step into the alley where the city's big ledger, the one measured in sleeping children and roofs that do not leak, adds another quiet line without needing your signature at all. You wake to a breeze that smells like wet clay learning a new song, and follow it to the canal where the river's spring temper rises and the banks rehearse patience. The water isn't wild, exactly, more like an animal that knows its name but pretends not to recognize you until you bring a bucket. Silt rides in from faraway snows. The surface carries thin islands of reeds. Frogs provide the percussion section to a concert no one had to sell tickets for. You kneel at the gauge post, a reed staff cut with careful nicks, and watch the water creep past a notch you learned to call almost audit. The steward stands behind you, counting under his breath, same as he does with sheep. Your tablet balances on your knee like a quiet hill. Seasons here are not small talk. They are accounting cycles with weather attached. First, the etiquette of flood. Spring swells the channels as upland snowmelt wanders south, and the city moves its ledgers to higher shelves the way families move rugs from a leaky corner. Gates wear fresh clay seals over their cords. When a steward and a gatekeeper open one, 3 bands roll across the knot like braids on a careful child. You add a new line to the day tablet, gate opened, 3rd watch, east intake, and the clay makes a sound like agreement when your wedge finds the exact pressure it likes. Joke 1. You grant yourself the title Assistant to the Assistant of Rain, which comes with no pay and a lifetime of politely staring at clouds. A work gang dredges. Men with reed scoops and sleds drag black silt from the bed and lay it on the banks, where farmers will later mix it into fields the way a kitchen folds spice into dough. You record how many sleds a watch can pull. The foreman records blisters. The river records nothing, which is a power move. A quirky tidbit sidles up under the smell of lanolin. Ropes hauling the sleds are greased with fat from those generous-tailed sheep. You met another use of the quiet treasure in their tails, so the cords slide without snagging, and palms forgive the day by dusk. The goat nominated as chief hydrologist tries to drink the measuring water and is banned from science for a full minute. You switch columns from water to dates. Somewhere between flood and first sowing, the scribes close the barley year with a tablet so meticulously calm it could tuck a city in. Opening remainder, receipts, issues, losses, carryover. You press the sign for closed, then roll a thin seal along the edge so future hands can hear who promised. The ledger sleeps, and you begin a new one with fresh clay and the same old hope. Historians still argue whether fiscal closing aligned to flood peak, to a city's festival calendar, or to the first day the fields accepted seed under reasonable skies. Every office swears its way is obvious, which is how you know the argument is older than the banks. The sowing rhythm is autumn in the south, once waters have behaved and retreated into the lines people drew. Teams walk fields in step, seed baskets at hips, hands remembering a motion their grandchildren will not have to be taught. You write seed-issued lines by the acre. Equivalent, your office uses fields mapped as neat rectangles on tablets that never met a straight line they didn't want to adopt. A mainstream fact lands like drier driftwood on a high bank. Southern Mesopotamian farming runs on irrigation, with sowing in autumn and harvesting in late spring or early summer. The calendar is lunar. 12 months of 29 or 30 days, and extra months are occasionally inserted, so barley doesn't pretend the moon owes it interest. Historians still argue whether intercalary months were announced by central authorities or decided temple by temple, year by year, with advice from elders who slept with their weather eyes open. Between cycles, the canals teach a math you can hear. A scribe recites a problem you've come to enjoy. This much width, that much depth, such and such speed per watch, how many banjars will wander into the dye yard by moonrise? You find your reciprocals with thumb and habit. Write the answer with wedges you sharpened on your nail. Then look up to find the weaver's runner already waiting with a grin that says, "Thank you for inventing time." Joke 2. The river applies for compensation as co-author of your math tablet. You approve one fish and an autograph on a particularly handsome ripple. Lambing arrives just when ledgers crave a fresh page. Ewes round out like new moons. Pens become nursery wards. Your sheep columns wake up from winter nap and start counting in halves again. You open a lamb ledger, quietly delighted by the administrative softness of it. Still numbers, still wedges, but with a smell of milk drifting past the inkless margin. Shearing follows when the fibers say so, not when schedules bark late spring, most years rationalized by wool forecasts that list expected minus per 100 ewes and actuals that try not to embarrass anyone. You cross-tie wool accounts to canal accounts because sheep and barley both drink. A good water year fattens fleece as surely as it fattens loaves. Festivals come like bookends. At the New Year rites, doors and gate ropes receive fresh seals, and you copy lists that pair offerings with office obligations, barley here, beer there, wool for the god's robe that will look humble and cost, a ledger, a sigh, months wear names that remember work and worship, harvest, brick-making, a god's procession. You add those names to headings without arguing with the moon. Your tablet begins to feel like a calendar that prefers nouns to numbers, which is deeply restful once you stop fighting it. The canal gods get their cut tiny bowls at small shrines where you set beer that smells like a fresh conversation between grain and time. A fisherman brings a votive boat of clay no longer than your palm and sets it on a shelf that has known 1,000 such boats. He asks you, softly, to note his weir watch hours so someone will remember he stood between water and village when the flood pushed. You make the entry, roll your seal, and discover that gratitude looks exactly like wedge signs when it's written without hurry. On a windy afternoon, you walk a levee with the engineer, who wears a reed hat and the posture of a person converting wind into trigonometry. He measures crest width with a knotted cord, checks for burrowing where things with sharp teeth propose to become hydrologists, and dictates a repair list to your tablet. You write with gloves off because the clay likes skin. In the margin, you add a humble line. Straw for patching, because straw teaches mud to refuse cracks, and cracks have a sense of entitlement in hot months. He nods once as if you understood mud personally, which, by now, you do. The flood falls, canals narrow back into their patient geometry, and you move the closed tablets to the cool shelf where big promises nap. Open tablets crowd the pegs. Seed issued, rations granted, night watches that read like lullabies. In a week, you will begin the barley harvest, count sickle crews paid in shares and rations, sheaves stacked like small cities in the Sunday. For now, the water speaks in a new tense. I was here, and I will be again. You answer in your own. We measured, and we will measure again. Even the goat senses a change, choosing to chew reeds on high ground with a wisdom it learned the hard way. The temple cat supervises canal math from a safe dryness and leaves a perfect paw on a trial tablet. No one scolds, because much worse has flowed through here and left bigger marks. Joke 3. You draft a proposal to list the cat as Senior Floodplain Analyst, salary payable in sunbeams, and the right to veto any tablet by sitting on it. By evening, you're back at the gauge post. The river slides past your fiducial notch with the confidence of someone wearing a new belt. You press your final line of the day. Level at second notch, below almost audit. Breeze from river. Frogs enthusiastic. And roll your seal once more. A ribbon over the shoulder of a sentence that needed company. The steward closes the gate with the satisfying click of well-behaved rope, and you tuck the tablet beside the closed one where the year slept, a matched bookend in clay. You don't declare the cycle conquered, only escorted. That is enough. Tomorrow you will count bread into hands again. Next week you will count sheaves. Next month, lambs. And when the snow forgets itself far away, water will start this page over in its own handwriting, and you will lend it a stylus. You return to the storeroom and notice something your hands feel before your eyes admit it. The token bowl is dusty. The tray of bulla, the rattling moons, has thinned to a crescent. Meanwhile, the tablet shelf has grown a new, orderly skyline. Edges beveled, seals rolled like tidy horizons. A messenger slips past, carrying no pouch at all, only a stack of thin clay rectangles against his chest, as if he's hugging a very sleepy city. When he turns a corner, nothing rattles. Silence is the new proof. The steward doesn't make a speech about it. He just sets today's forms on the table, flat tablets, damp, willing, and parks the token bowl farther back, where your elbow won't find it by habit. When requests arrive, you don't reach for cones and lentils. You reach for numbers, commodity signs, metrological companions. You write 2 bands of oil, and the line stands on its own legs without borrowing a lentil's body to prove it knows how to walk. A mainstream fact settles like a cat into the warmest spot. Over the 3rd millennium BCE, tokens and bullae largely retreat as cuneiform administration matures. Tablets carry numerical notations, commodity signs, offices, and dates with enough authority that objects no longer need to impersonate goods to make managers sleep. The practical reasons hum like the loom court. Tablets copy themselves easily, scribe to scribe, office to office, so checks can travel without breaking anything. Shelves stack thinner, couriers move lighter, and audits read like roads instead of riddles. The steward gives you a demonstration you didn't know you wanted. 2 identical tablets, same line order, seal ribbons aligned, one filed here, one sent there. If either forgets itself, he says, the other remembers. 2. Factor clay authentication persists, but the factors are now ribbons and wedges, not ribbons and rattles. You take the token bowl down anyway, honoring old habit, and run your fingers through the cool shapes one last indulgent time. They feel like pocket nouns from a language you can still speak but don't need to. The apprentice, always ready to turn memory into craft, needs a few worn cones back into fresh clay, and you realize the circle is kind. Yesterday's counters become today's pages. Quirky tidbit for your private museum. In some rooms, a handful of tokens survive as teaching toys and game pieces found beside spool weights and astragalus knucklebones long after ledgers stopped needing them. You imagine a child inventing a game called Don't Let the Goat Audit, which has extremely simple rules and only one undefeated player. A runner from the granary brings a bulla for opening one of the last. The witnesses gather with the reflex of old ceremony. The steward cracks the shell. The tokens spill like little fossils of intention. This time, instead of pressing them into a summary tablet, you translate directly into wedges and return the tokens to the retired jar, where they sit like elders listening to their grandchildren read. Historians still argue whether writing was born straight from tokens as a set of impressed stand-ins that turned into signs, or whether tokens, seals, tallies, and painted marks together nudged administration toward abstraction until writing stepped forward as the office's most efficient whisper. Either way, the room has decided which whisper it trusts at scale. The seal room adapts without sulking. Cylinder seals keep rolling, but now they kiss the edges of tablets more often than they march around bullae. The steward adds a habit that feels both new and inevitable: clay envelopes for tablets. He lays a thin skin over a finished page, rolls seal ribbons across the seams, and copies the first lines of text onto the envelope's face so readers can file by topic without prying. You press an envelope shut and hear an older echo, the bulla's hush recast for a flatter age. Joke 1. You name it, privacy mode. And the steward, who hates branding almost as much as goats, pretends not to smile. In the Adubba, curricula shift like furniture. Token-impressed practice tablets give way to columns of numerals, commodity signs, and neat professions lists. Students still learn by touch, but the touch is stylus, not cone. Reciprocals sing. Place value ideas begin flirting with the margins. A mainstream detail steps in with tidy sandals. By the Old Babylonian period, scribes write sexagesimal numbers with positional logic. Notches and place keep meaning honest without multiplying sign types. Your hand now moves faster than a pouch could wedge, breathe, wedge, breathe, and you realize the city has traded a choreography of objects for a choreography of strokes. The steward shows you one more adaptation with the softness of a parent explaining the new bedtime. Sealed tablets can be filed without opening, easily copied, and quoted in the next office's ledger by title line alone. A textile steward arrives, asks for last month's wool allocations, and you fetch them from a labeled pile without lifting a single token. The cat, sensing a reduction in dinner-adjacent rattling, relocates to the warm shelf above the tablet rack and promotes itself to head of non-interference. Joke 2. You compose a thank you letter to the token bowl for its years of service and address it to whom it may concerned. Look, which is very funny to exactly one scribe and a goat. Outside, practice keeps pace with theory. A weaver's memo arrives as a thin tablet. 2 Silas barley advanced for night shift. Indigo vot cooled. Return expected dawn. You add your approval line, roll your ribbon, and hang it by the door with a clay tag so the runner can locate it in a blink. When the goods move, no bulla rides the cord. Your signature lives at the edge, your numbers in the middle, your sanity on a peg. The runner leaves, nothing rattling, everything legible. You still carry a memory of weight, the compact certainty of a bulla in the palm, the way a cone's tip told your skin grain. Some evenings you'll miss that haptic reassurance the way someone misses paper after switching to a screen. But the system rewards the city's appetite. A long ration list can be duplicated for 3 courts at once. A disputed line can be checked against a cousin copy across the canal. A mistake can be sponged and rewritten without boiling an envelope back into mud. Historians still argue whether this shift democratized knowledge or merely centralized it more efficiently. Did tablets make accounts more visible to ordinary workers, or did they tighten the circle of those who could read? And your answer tonight is a shrug with clean edges. The weavers eat on time, and the goat has fewer edible temptations. At dusk, the steward performs a quiet retirement ritual. He tips the retired tokens into a basin of clean water and kneads them until shape becomes paste. Past becomes possibility. Tomorrow's tablets will remember what yesterday's tokens forgot on purpose. You help, palms sticky with the biography of systems, and catch yourself smiling at the humility in the cycle. Joke 3. You declare yourself Director of Token Reincarnation. And the cat, who has opinions about reincarnation, blinks once in approval before falling asleep on a docket titled, Do Not Disturb. You close the day by writing a sentence you didn't know you'd needed, no tokens enclosed. The line sits in the margin like a farewell that isn't sad, only complete. On the shelf, tablet edges make their small city. On the pegboard, clay tags hang with the easy posture of names that know where home is. The goat watches you lock the door and, for an entire minute, does not try to eat the seal. Progress wears funny hats in Uruk, and tonight one of them has horns. As you step into the alley, you inventory your own pockets purely out of habit. No cones, no lentils, no ovoids sleeping against your hip. Instead, you carry a stylus, a damp sponge, and a memory of how numbers learned to move without bodies. In the distance, the granary door receives its evening ribbon. The canal mutters about tomorrow's level. The Adubba recites a last reciprocal to the moths. Your palms smell like clay and river, and a little lanolin that refuses to give up. You touch the tablet you filed on the way out, and feel the city answer with a smooth, cool certainty that doesn't need to rattle to be heard. Tomorrow, someone with a trowel and a hunch will open a future trench and meet these pages where our hands left them to dry. But that belongs to another section, one where tablets leave shelves for the afterlife of dirt and the long patience of reading backward through time. For now, you walk home lighter by a bowl and heavier by a script, counting your steps in base 60 just to keep the night company. You kneel at a modern trench whose edges are straight because patience carries a string. Dawn makes the dust glow. Your trowel has a PhD in taking its time. The site is Warka to the nearby town and Uruk to your memory. A city you've been walking in all night from the inside. Now you walk it from above. Centimeter by forgiving centimeter. A square of shade cloth floats like a slow cloud overhead, and the field director's clipboard flutters with maps that are really conversations between dirt and guesswork. You rest your palm on the section wall and feel bands of centuries in colors, only mud cares to name flood, silt, brick, crumble, hearth smudges, each a ledger written without letters, and still perfectly legible to a hand that watches. You trowel until the ting changes, soft clay gives way to something that rings. A tablet fragment peeks out, beveled edge, the faint geometry of wedges that once took orders from a reed. You lift it into the morning with a brush and a grin you will deny later at dinner. Joke 1. You silently award yourself assistant to the assistant of dirt, with benefits payable in shade. The conservator brings a tray. The fragment rides on foam like a dignitary, and the site recorder writes a line that begins, blessedly, with tablet. A mainstream fact stands up and stretches. The earliest proto-cuneiform tablets, thousands of them, come from late 4th millennium levels at Uruk and nearby sites like Jemdet Naz. Many were accidentally fired in ancient building fires, which is why they survived at all. Disaster did the kilns work. You wash your hands and sit under the shade to read the fragment the way you once read a doorway, by edges first. No bulla rattle here. The proof has flattened itself into a chorus of wedges. Commodity sign? Number cluster? A metrological complement, it's a ration line, as familiar as your own breath now, except the breath is older than any calendar you've held. The epigrapher leans in, tilts, hums. You catch the low delight of someone watching strokes bloom into sense. A quirky tidbit wanders into the conversation and sits down. Small paw prints sometimes cross tablets and bricks, the studio cat of 4,000 years ago signing off with unprofessional excellence. Today, near the fragment's corner, a ghostly oval pad whispers, peer review approved. Across the trench, a cluster of broken spheres turns up the blanched halves of bulla with seal bands still wrapping nothing. You cradle one like a bird's egg and feel the absent rattle. Tokens long gone, promise expired, container retired. Someone lays the halves together, and the seam still remembers whose wrist rolled which parade. You almost hear the old routine in close, string, seal, and realize that you are holding a security system that believed in texture more than shouting. The registrar catalogs the seals, banquet scene, contest scene. A tidy god with an improbable hat then slides them into labeled bags where modern two-factor authentication is a zip tie and a signature. The spoil heap yields a rain of small, thick bowls, each with a crude bevel that would embarrass a potter on payday. You grin. Beveled. Rim bowls, the paper cups of antiquity. Their ubiquity is its own lullaby. Archaeologists still argue whether these were ration containers, single-use baking molds for cereal cakes, or convenient measures for barley that preferred to be counted and consumed at the same speed. You turn one in your hand and imagine a weaver palming a full bowl after a long night at the loom. You imagine a supervisor stamping the rim with a damp thumb that said, gently, "That's enough." At the fines table, the epigrapher brings out squeezes paper casts taken from tablets in museum stores and newer 3D scans that let light read what fingertips may not. You sit with both, toggling between the replica's crispness and the screen's shiver, and mark the commodity sign you now recognize the way you'd recognize a friend's walk from far away. Historians still argue whether proto-cuneiform is already language-bound Sumerian or a supralinguistic record-keeping system slowly drifting toward speech. But the line on your fragment does not care. It issues barley to a team, and you can almost smell the strainer's patient holes. An architecture specialist lays out a wall plan made of small, tidy rectangles, rooms where shelves once lived, floors that remember jars, doorways that still teach posture. You realize storerooms make similar shapes in every century. Heavy things low, fragile things high, seals facing outward so meaning is public. Joke 2. Somewhere in the dig house there is definitely a goat-shaped gap in the fence of evidence, and you are not volunteering to guard it. The team tags a mud brick stamped long ago with an official mark, and you can't help running a finger across the grit as if it might purr like one of your old calibration jars. You map contexts this tablet fragment from locus 312, that bulla half from locus 320, until the grid in your notebook feels like the pegboard where you once hung clay tags at dusk. Context now is the seal, the knot, the witness. Lose it, and a thing becomes trivia. Keep it, and a thing becomes a sentence that joins a paragraph that joins a city. A mainstream detail leans in with a hat tip. Many tablets that we read today were fired by accident in conflagrations that also hardened bricks. Unfired tablets, by contrast, often dissolve back into the river they came from. Preservation is a weather report masquerading as a syllabus. At lunch, you meet a specialist in animal bone who identifies sheep and goat from splinters so small you suspect sorcery. She says fat-tailed breeds leave particular traces. You taste tail balm again on your knuckles and smile at the city's continuity. Historians still argue whether temple households monopolized production or whether private and institutional braided more tightly than our categories like. The bone specialist shrugs like a person who believes lists and dinners collaborated more than they competed. She shows you cut marks from shearing and a healed break on a ram's horn core. You write a tiny note that says, "Head of loudness, survived committee meeting." Afternoon light goes honey soft, the kind of light that bakes tablets without malice. You brush a surface and find a door-sealing clay lump cord mark, 3 seal bands across a knot long gone. You photograph, draw, lift, bag. In your head, the door opens and the granary hum wakes. You can hear the breath, count, the banjar's rim, the rations converting from nouns to verbs. Joke 3. You consider gloating that your resume now includes CSI, not impressions, but the trench prefers humility. And anyway, the cat is already on staff as senior forensic paw. In the lab tent, you help rejoin fragments that forgot each other for millennia. Edges talk, grains align. A corner of metrological sign kisses its twin, and the word for ban completes itself with the satisfaction of a jar finding its lid. The conservator laughs the quiet laugh of someone allowed to perform time travel with glue. You pencil a drawing of the rejoined line, and catch yourself adding more white space than necessary typography habits from Uruk still running in your wrists. Evening brings a small ceremony you didn't know you needed. The director reads the day's accessions. The team nods in the manner of people who know how to celebrate without making the dust jealous. Someone recites a line from an old hymn to a goddess of writing. Someone else murmurs a recipe for bapir that has survived on kitchen muscle memory. You stack trays, tie labels, and roll a fresh seal into the margin of your notebook, not authority. Just a reminder that identity still likes texture. When you step away from the trench, the horizon is the same leveled line you once used to true a tablet's edge. You think of the tokens dissolved into new clay, of bulla retired into teaching tools, of tablets that learned to keep their own secrets sealed. You think of goats sparing calibration shelves, of cats approving by sleeping, of jars that remain exactly one sila no matter how much you compliment them. And you think, with a restful certainty rare in any century, that the long partnership between counting and kindness is still the city's best idea, one that left just enough clay behind for you to read it back into breathing. Slow down with me now. Let the trench fold itself back into smooth ground, the strings taken up, the shade cloth floating away like a careful thought. The trowel goes back in its canvas sleeve. The brush returns to its cup. The dust settles and becomes part of the landscape again, content to wait until another dawn wants a quiet conversation. Breathe in something simple. Cool air that remembers water. A hint of grain, a memory of warm clay. Let your shoulders follow that breath downward, like a rope easing a door closed without a sound. If any numbers are still turning in your head, imagine them as gentle lamps set along a corridor. One by one they dim, not from urgency, but because the room knows you now and doesn't need to be so bright. The tablets we touched find their shelves. The seals rest on their pegs. The goat refrains from heroics. The cat chooses the warmest square of woven mat and approves the evening by closing its eyes. Far away, a canal moves in slow sentences toward the river, and even the river seems to speak more softly, as if the moon has asked it to whisper. You stand at the storeroom doorway just long enough to feel the night draft lift a strand of hair, then step back, letting the latch find its place. Imagine your own day sealed with an easy ribbon, no weight to carry, no rattle to remember, only a smooth edge with your name resting on it. The promise that you can open it again when you like, or leave it closed while you sleep. In this quiet, small sounds become generous. The fan's low hum, a distant street's soft hush, your own breath, steady and kind. Count if you wish not sheep this time, but stylus of calm, bands of warmth, a single gur of rest poured slowly into the hour. When the numbers fade, let them go. There is nothing here that needs your attention more than sleep.